June 2024, Fayetteville, North Carolina. The evening heat clung to my uniform as I stepped onto the porch my father had built 20 years ago. The paint had faded to the color of pale sand, and the wind chimes he hung still rattled in the humidity. For a moment, it almost felt like home. Then I saw the unfamiliar car in the driveway and heard the laughter inside. Lorraine's voice, sharp, sweet, and false, echoed from the dining room. My stepmother never laughed that freely when my father was alive. I hesitated at the door, my duty belt heavy on my hip. I had driven straight from Fort Liberty body cam, still clipped under my jacket from the shift I had finished an hour earlier. I didn't plan to record anything, but a soldier learns not to assume peace. When I stepped inside, the smell of white wine and roasted chicken hit me first. The table was already set for 3, Lorraine, her daughter Aubrey, and a chair left open as if for me. Aubrey's phone light glowed on her face as she scrolled. Lorraine turned her lips tight. "Sloan," she said, pretending warmth. "We were just talking about you." I nodded once. "I can tell." Lorraine gestured toward the chair. "Sit. We've got things to settle." Her tone wasn't an invitation. I stayed standing. "You changed the locks," I said quietly. "That house isn't yours to keep me out of." Lorraine sipped her wine. "Your father wanted me to have stability. You've got your military pay your base housing. Let us handle this place." Aubrey snorted. "The bank already signed it over." My throat tightened. "That signature isn't mine." Lorraine's eyes flicked up cold. "Stop talking like a cop, Sloan." "Your family." I stared at the papers spread across the table, notarized in some county office I'd never heard of. My pulse pounded. "You forged this." Aubrey slammed her phone down. "You think you can control everything because you wear that uniform Dad's gone. You're not in charge here." I didn't answer. My training told me silence draws out the truth faster than words. Lorraine's face reddened. "You think that uniform makes you better than us? Take it off and you're nothing but a guest." I exhaled slowly. "That uniform represents a code. It's the only reason I haven't walked out." Lorraine's hand trembled as she set her glass down. "You won't disrespect me in my own house." "It's not your house," I said, my voice even. The air split with the sound of the glass tipping over, shattering across the hardwood. Lorraine rose. "Aubrey, show her what respect looks like." Aubrey's eyes flashed half drunk, half desperate. "Mom, don't!" Lorraine's voice cracked high and sharp. "Break her jaw." The words seemed to hang in the air, unreal for half a second, until Aubrey stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She grabbed a small hammer from the utility cart near the door, the one my father used for hanging picture frames. My muscles tensed, instinct rising, but I didn't move. The body cam in my pocket vibrated once its motion sensor activating. "Put it down, Aubrey," I said evenly. "You don't want this on record." Lorraine's breathing quickened. "She's bluffing." The wine bottle tipped, spilling across the table. Aubrey took a step forward. The hammer trembled in her hand. I met her eyes. "Think about what happens 2 minutes from now." "You think we're scared of your army rules," Lorraine hissed. "You came here alone." I heard something distant sirens carried by the humid air, faint but growing. My phone had connected automatically when the cam activated, pinging the Fort Liberty dispatch cloud. I hadn't expected it to, neither had they. The sound reached the driveway, distinct, closing in. Red and blue reflections flickered through the window glass. Aubrey froze mid-step, her hand shaking. Lorraine's face went pale. I stood still, the calm before impact. When the knock came, 3 firm raps against the door. No one spoke. Only the hammer slipped from Aubrey's grip and struck the floor with a dull metallic ring. My voice was low but clear. "You said family, Lorraine. Family doesn't trap each other. Family doesn't fake signatures. Family doesn't scream, 'break her jaw.'" Outside, another siren joined the first. The porch light glared through the curtains, and for the first time that night, Lorraine's arrogance cracked into fear. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I simply waited. Justice was already on its way. The morning after the shouting, the air around Fayetteville felt heavier than usual. June sunlight pushed through the blinds of the motel room I had checked into after the police left. The faint hum of traffic along Skibo Road was the same as when I was a teenager, but it no longer sounded like comfort. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, still wearing the undershirt from my uniform. The bruise on my wrist from the rope had turned light purple. I touched it and reminded myself it wasn't pain, it was proof. I had promised the CID investigator I'd return to Fort Liberty by Monday, but first I needed to visit the one place that stopped feeling like home long before last night. My father had built that house with his own hands after returning from deployment in 1998. He poured every overtime check, every scraped knuckle into it. After Mom died when I was 11, that porch became the place where we ate dinner in silence, waiting for the sound of crickets to fill the space her laughter left behind. When he remarried Lorraine 2 years later, everything changed. She brought bright curtains, fake plants, and a voice that cut like glass. She never yelled when Dad was around. She didn't have to. Her silence said everything. I used to tell myself she was just lonely trying to blend into a family that already had its rhythm. But by the time I left for basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, she had already claimed the living room as her space. Dad and I spent our last weekend before I shipped out repairing the porch steps. He told me, keep your head down and do the job right. People notice quiet strength. That was the last advice he ever gave me. In 2023, while I was deployed to Kuwait, he passed from a heart attack. Lorraine's call came 2 days later. Her voice was calm, too calm. "The funeral's done, Sloan. I didn't want to bother your unit." The line went silent after that. When I came home that fall, every photo of my mother was gone from the walls. Lorraine had repainted the house beige. Aubrey had moved back in to help around. I asked about the will, and Lorraine handed me a single envelope with nothing inside but a photocopy of a mortgage statement. She said, "Your father wanted things simple." I didn't believe her, but I also didn't have proof. At Fort Liberty, we're trained to separate suspicion from evidence. That's what I did until last week. The call from the bank came out of nowhere. "Captain Parker, we need your verification for the refinance paperwork," the man on the line said. I froze. What refinance? The signatures on the documents matched my name perfectly, right down to the loop in the S. Someone had practiced. When I asked for a copy, the man hesitated. "It's already approved, ma'am." My pulse tightened. By who? By you, apparently. That night, I drove back to Fayetteville. I didn't tell my CO the full story. I just said it was family business. Soldiers know what that means. Something you can't explain in a form. The drive took 90 minutes, but my thoughts stretched years. Every mile brought back arguments I tried to forget. Lorraine's voice saying, "You're not even his real daughter." Aubrey's laughter echoing from the porch as I packed for deployment. I remembered Dad standing between us once, weary but kind. Enough he had said, looking at Lorraine. "She's my kid." That's the end of it. Now the house he built felt like proof of something unfinished. When I parked on the curb near the old mailbox, I saw how Lorraine had replaced the rose bushes with plastic ones. The porch railing still had the carved initials SP and JP from when Dad and I built it. They hadn't sanded those out yet. For a second, I almost believed walking inside would fix it all. But inside, nothing was familiar. The smell of lemon polish was heavy, like it was covering something else. Lorraine's voice came from the kitchen, too smooth. "Sloan, you should have called before dropping in." I noticed the locks on the doorframe new and heavy. I didn't know I needed permission to enter my father's home. She laughed softly. "You're still dramatic." Aubrey looked up from her phone, half smile, half smirk. "You here for your stuff again? I'm here for the truth," I said. Lorraine's wine glass clicked against the counter. "Truth doesn't change the deed, dear." I looked at her and saw the faint tremor in her hand. She wasn't confident. She was cornered. "You forged my name," I said. "You don't even write cursive like that." Aubrey rolled her eyes. "Here we go, the Army Detective Act." I kept my voice steady. "I spoke to the bank. They have the documents." Lorraine's jaw tightened. "You should have stayed on base." I took one slow breath, grounding myself. Dad taught me this house meant family, not property. "You made it both." She stepped closer. "You'll regret crossing me." "No," I said, looking straight at her. "You'll regret underestimating me. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just touched the porch rail one last time and whispered to myself, he built this with his hands and they called it theirs. It was a Wednesday morning when the call came through. I was standing outside the motor pool at Fort Liberty, heat rising off the asphalt, waiting for a vehicle inspection form to clear. My phone buzzed twice before I noticed the caller ID. Fayetteville First National Bank. I frowned. I hadn't used that account since my father passed. "Captain Parker," I answered. The man's voice on the other end was polite but unsure. "Ma'am, we're just calling to confirm your authorization for the refinance. The system flagged your signature for verification." For a moment, the world went still. "Refinance?" I asked. "Yes, the mortgage on the property at 427 Ashbrook Drive," he said. "We received the updated paperwork last week. Looks like you consolidated under your personal account ending in 9034. My heart thudded once, slow and heavy. "You're saying I refinanced that house?" "According to the documents. Yes, ma'am." Signed and notarized. My hand tightened around the phone. "Can you email me a copy?" He hesitated. "We can, but we already processed the approval." "Processed?" I stepped away from the motor pool, lowering my voice. "Sir, that house was supposed to transfer through probate. My father's estate was never refinanced." "Well," he said slowly, "the signature matches perfectly. But if you're saying you didn't authorize it, I didn't." The word came out sharper than I intended. "I need to see those documents immediately." "Understood. I'll send them to your official address." When the email came 5 minutes later, I opened the attachment and stared at the digital signature. It was my name looped cursive S-sharp tail on the P. But the date format wasn't mine. Whoever forged it had copied my style, but not my details. I felt the ground tilt under my boots. Someone had studied my signature long enough to mimic it. Only one person had access to that kind of paperwork, Lorraine. She'd helped Dad with the mortgage once before. She knew how the forms looked. The realization hit like static in my ears. I walked straight to the JAG Legal Assistance Office on post. The air inside smelled like printer ink and coffee. A young lieutenant behind the desk glanced up. "How can I help you, Captain?" I slid my phone across the counter. Possible forgery. Mortgage documents. Fayetteville property. He scrolled through the files, brows rising. "Who's the other party?" "My stepmother." He nodded slowly. "Okay. You're within your rights to file a complaint. But since it's a civil matter, you'll need to start through the local bank and property clerk's office. We can help you write the sworn statement if needed. Can you tell if this qualifies as criminal?" He clicked his pen. "If she profited or transferred assets without your consent, yes. Especially if she falsified a federal signature." I felt the discipline in my posture hold me upright. "So forgery under state and possibly federal jurisdiction." "Exactly." He handed the phone back. "Captain, do yourself a favor, document everything. Dates, times, names, even conversations. Keep it factual." "That's not a problem." He smiled slightly. "Didn't think it would be, ma'am." Outside, the Carolina sky blazed too bright to look at. The base was alive with the usual sounds, soldiers calling cadence engines turning over the clang of tools. It should have grounded me. Instead, I felt disoriented, like my world had tilted 10 degrees and I was the only one who noticed. I went to my CO's office to request emergency leave. Colonel Whitaker was signing paperwork when I knocked. "Captain Parker, what's up?" he asked. "Personal issue, sir. Family matter in Fayetteville. Everything okay?" "Not exactly. I might be dealing with property fraud tied to my father's estate." He studied me for a moment. "You have proof, not yet. But I'll get it." He nodded once. 72 hours. "Take your duty phone, keep me posted if this crosses legal lines." "Yes, sir." "And, Captain," he added as I turned, "stay professional, even with family." His words landed heavier than he knew. I packed light a duffel bag my sidearm stored per regulation and the small body cam we used during off-post patrols. Technically, it wasn't standard to wear off duty, but there was no rule against personal recording in public spaces. The habit had saved me before. I charged the cam, checked the storage, and slipped it into the inner pocket of my jacket. Not to provoke, just to protect. That night, I stared at the base lights from my barracks window. The hum of generators filled the distance. Lorraine had waited until Dad was gone until I was overseas to rewrite his legacy. She had counted on me staying silent, too disciplined to fight back. She had forgotten that silence doesn't mean surrender. I printed every email, every call log, every copy of the forged mortgage. I tucked them into a folder marked Ashbrook Personal. Then I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had once held a rifle, now shaking with something colder than adrenaline. Betrayal feels heavier than combat gear. Before sleeping, I tested the body cam one more time. The red light blinked once and faded. It was small enough to hide, but powerful enough to catch everything. I placed it inside my bag, right beside the folder. If they planned to lie again this time, the truth would have eyes. The drive from Fort Liberty to Fayetteville stretched under a sky the color of burnished steel. I left base just after sunrise, the windows rolled halfway down the scent of pine, drifting through the Jeep. The road followed NC 87 south, a stretch I could drive blindfolded. Every sign, every dip in the asphalt carried pieces of my past. On-duty driving means focus eyes forward, hands steady, but that morning it meant remembering. I remembered my father standing beside me when I was 16, teaching me how to replace a radiator hose on this same Jeep. His hands were rough, steady, patient. Always check twice, he'd said. Mistakes are quiet until they cost you. He wasn't talking about engines. When I stopped for gas near Spout Springs, the morning sun reflected off the pump handle, and for a heartbeat, I saw his shadow in my mind, apron stained with barbecue sauce, standing over the grill on a Saturday afternoon. Lorraine had complained about the smoke that day. He'd laughed and said smoke means it's working. Now that smell was gone. When I pulled back onto the highway, the nostalgia started to sour. The closer I got to Fayetteville, the heavier my chest felt. Every familiar landmark looked altered. The grocery store near Riley Road had new lettering. The tire shop Dad used to visit was boarded up. Even the air seemed to hum differently. I passed the sign entering Fayetteville city limits and whispered, "Now strangers live there." Traffic thickened near Skibo Road. Fayetteville on a Friday always buzzed with payday energy soldiers and trucks. Teenagers in line at fast food windows, families buying groceries. To them, it was another summer day. To me, it was a slow return to a battlefield no one else could see. I turned onto Ashbrook Drive around 9:30. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. Trimmed lawns, plastic flamingos, porch flags faded from the Carolina sun. But when I pulled up in front of my father's house, the sight made my throat tighten. The gate was padlocked. A fresh white sign hung from the fence. Private property, no trespassing. I parked on the curb and sat for a moment listening to the faint buzz of cicadas. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The porch railing, once warm cedar, was now painted gray. Curtains hung where Dad's sheer blinds used to be. I could still picture him on that porch, waving to the mail carrier, humming some old Creedence song under his breath. I stepped out of the Jeep gravel, crunching under my boots, and walked toward the gate. The mailbox had been replaced, too. Instead of Parker in brass letters, it read L. Hawthorne, Lorraine's maiden name. My jaw tightened. She hadn't just taken the house. She'd erased the name. I rattled the padlock lightly, no movement inside. Then a voice floated from behind the door, smooth, rehearsed. "Sloan, you should have called." Lorraine stood framed in the doorway, silk robe glass of something amber in her hand. Her lipstick was perfect for 9 in the morning. "Morning," I said flatly. The sign wasn't necessary. "Oh, that?" She smiled, lifting her glass. "We had a few kids cutting through the yard. It's not personal. It is when my name's still on the deed." Her eyes glinted. "Not anymore." She stepped aside just enough for me to see Aubrey lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone like the night before had never happened. "You're persistent," Lorraine said. "Most people would be embarrassed after a scene like that." "Most people wouldn't forge a signature," I replied. Aubrey snorted. "You and your evidence obsession. You always were Dad's little detective." My breath came slow measured. "Where's the paperwork, Lorraine?" Why, she asked lightly. Planning another performance. "Maybe call your army friends again. This isn't about them. It's about fraud. Big word for family," she said. The smell of cheap perfume mixed with furniture polish drifted toward me. I caught sight of the framed photos on the wall behind her, all new. No trace of my father. "You replaced everything," I said quietly. "Even his picture." Lorraine's voice softened with mock sympathy. You soldiers always need altars to your past. It's unhealthy. He earned his place here." "So did I," she snapped, mask slipping for a heartbeat. Then she forced a smile. "Look, Sloan, we both know the bank wouldn't approve a refinance without real paperwork. Maybe you forgot signing. You were under stress after his death. You really think I'd forget authorizing a 6-figure loan? You'd be surprised what grief makes people do." She set her drink down, her tone dropping. "Go back to your base, Captain. Leave this alone. Not a chance." For a second, her calm cracked. "You're not as smart as you think." "Maybe not," I said, "but I record everything now." Her lips twitched. "That a threat?" "No," I answered. "A statement of fact." She stepped forward, voice dropping. "Don't forget whose roof you're standing under." "My father's," I said, and turned back toward the gate. Behind me, I heard her mutter to Aubrey, "She's asking for trouble." The metal latch scraped as I locked eyes with her once more. "Trouble already found you," I said quietly. The sun had risen higher by the time I reached my Jeep, the light burning through the windshield. I glanced back once before driving off. Lorraine stood on the porch, her robe fluttering hand shielding her eyes, pretending she wasn't shaken. The private property sign swayed slightly in the wind. My father's porch. His work. Their claim. I pulled onto NC 87 again, this time without looking back. Lorraine called that evening just before sunset. Her voice, smooth and falsely warm, came through the line like silk over glass. "Sloan, since you're back in town, why don't you come for dinner? We can talk like adults." I hesitated, hearing the faint clink of ice in her glass through the receiver. "What's the occasion?" I asked. "Closure," she said. "And maybe a truce." I agreed, not because I trusted her, but because I needed her guard down. By 7, I was pulling up to the house again, the smell of grilled steak drifting through the open windows. The same porch lights my father had strung years ago still glowed, though half the bulbs flickered weakly. I could almost imagine him there, apron tight at his waist, radio humming softly. Instead, the door opened to Lorraine in a crimson dress perfume thick enough to choke the air. "Captain Parker," she said with a smirk. Still punctual. Inside, Aubrey lounged at the table, scrolling her phone. The dining room looked unfamiliar. New chairs, new art, nothing left of the life that had built it. Only the old clock in the corner ticked on steady and loud. Lorraine poured wine without asking. "You've had a long day," she said, sliding a glass toward me. "Let's not fight tonight. I didn't touch it." "You said you wanted to talk." "Yes." She took her seat, crossing her legs with practiced poise. "I want us to settle this house situation quietly. Lawyers are so messy, and your reputation is worth more than drywall." "You forged my name," I said evenly. "That's not a misunderstanding." Aubrey let out a short laugh. "Always the soldier, everything black and white." "Some things are," I said. Lorraine leaned forward, smiling faintly. "Look, Sloan, we both know your father left things unclear. He didn't trust lawyers. He trusted me. He asked me to keep this place intact. You being here complicates that." I studied her face, calm, controlled, too careful. "If he wanted me gone, he would have told me himself." "He tried," she said, softly swirling her wine. "But you were always somewhere overseas, weren't you? Always too busy being the hero to notice what was happening at home." The words hit harder than I expected. I kept my breathing slow. "You think serving my country means abandoning him? I think it made you forget who you were fighting for." Her tone carried a bitter undercurrent that felt rehearsed. Aubrey finally looked up from her phone. "You can't win this, Sloan. Mom's right. Just sign it, make it easy. You've got your army life. Why cling to this place?" My pulse drummed behind my ribs, but my voice stayed level. "Because this isn't about walls, it's about truth." Lorraine's smile faltered for the first time. "Truth doesn't change paperwork." "Neither does forgery," I replied. The air thickened. Aubrey slammed her phone down, leaning across the table. "You don't belong here. Dad never wanted you here anyway." The sentence cut through the air like a blade. For a heartbeat, the room went silent except for the slow tick of the clock. I stared at Aubrey, remembering the girl who used to follow me around the yard when we were kids, begging to braid my hair. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it, but the venom in her eyes told me otherwise. Lorraine reached for her daughter's wrist, pretending to soothe her. Enough, Aubrey. She's sensitive about her place in this family. Then she turned back to me, voice dropping. Sign the papers, Sloan. We'll let you take Dad's truck, maybe a small portion from the life insurance. Clean break. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Not until I see the documents. Lorraine's jaw tightened. You already have copies. I have forgeries I corrected. Her smile vanished. You think you're so clever, she whispered. Walking in here with that uniform like it means something. It doesn't protect you here. I met her eyes calmly. Neither does deceit. Aubrey stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. You think you can walk in here and act like you're better than us because you wear a badge? You're nothing but a guest in this house. A guest doesn't pay the mortgage, I said softly. A thief does. The glass in Lorraine's hand trembled. Watch your mouth. Or what I asked. Her hand tightened around the stem until it cracked. Red wine spilled across the table, bleeding into the white tablecloth like something alive. You've always been ungrateful, she hissed. Your father gave you everything and you repaid him by leaving him alone with me. He was never alone, I said. You just never listened. The argument could have exploded then, but I forced myself to stay still. That's what years in uniform teach you control in the middle of chaos. I reached for my folder, pulling out one printed page. This, I said, sliding it across the table, is the email from the bank confirming a pending fraud review. They already flagged the signature. You might want to prepare for that. Lorraine stared down at it, color draining from her face. You wouldn't. I already did. Aubrey whispered something sharp under her breath. Lorraine's expression hardened again, armor snapping back in place. Get out of my house. Gladly, I said, standing. I picked up my jacket, careful not to reveal the faint red light glowing from the body cam inside. As I turned toward the door, Lorraine spat. You'll regret this. I paused at the threshold. No, I said quietly. You will. The air outside was thick with humidity. I walked down the porch steps, each one creaking the way it always had. Behind me, their voices rose again, angry, desperate, but I didn't turn back. The night smelled like smoke and wine and rot. Humiliation burned through my chest, but beneath it pulsed something steadier. Resolve. Lorraine's voice carried from the kitchen as I reached the door. Sloan, wait. I turned just enough to see her standing in the hallway, one hand on the doorframe, her face set in an almost maternal calm. Let's talk privately, she said. Aubrey gets emotional, and I don't want this to turn into another shouting match. The tone was disarmingly even too smooth, too measured. I'd heard that tone before from suspects trying to buy time. My instincts bristled, but I nodded slowly. 5 minutes, I said. She gestured toward the side door leading to the garage. We can talk there. Quieter. The air inside smelled faintly of gasoline and lemon polish, the same scent from when my father used to tinker with his old Jeep. The overhead light flickered, humming faintly. A single wooden chair sat in the middle of the room, out of place like it had been waiting. Lorraine closed the door behind us, the lock clicking softly. I glanced at her. What's this A seat? She said lightly. You've been on edge all day. Sit and let's talk like family. I'll stand, I said. Suit yourself. She walked around the chair, fingertips brushing the backrest, eyes studying me with quiet calculation. You always were just like your father, too proud to bend. Pride isn't the same as dignity. No, she said, but both can be broken. She moved suddenly, grabbing a length of rope from the workbench. My hand twitched toward my side out of instinct, but she laughed. Relax. It's for your own safety. Excuse me. You're unstable, she said softly. You storm in accusing us of crimes, waving documents, recording conversations. What if you hurt yourself in one of your episodes? That's not going to work, I said. I'm not signing anything and I'm not playing this game. Lorraine's eyes hardened. Sit down. No. Then I'll make you. She lunged faster than I expected for her age, looping the rope around my wrist. I blocked her arm, but before I could pull away, Aubrey appeared in the doorway, holding something heavy in her hand, a hammer from my father's old toolbox. Mom said you're dangerous, she said, voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. You can't just come in here threatening us. Lorraine snapped. Do it. Aubrey froze. Mom, break her jaw. Do it before she ruins everything. My pulse slowed to a strange, steady rhythm. The air felt thick, my body remembering years of close quarters training. Aubrey, I said quietly. Put it down. Her eyes darted toward her mother. Lorraine's expression was pure command. Do it, she screamed. I didn't move. My voice stayed calm, measured, almost detached. Everything you say is being recorded. For the first time, Lorraine hesitated. What? I reached slowly toward my jacket pocket. Careful, deliberate. There's a camera inside, I said. Standard issue, cloud-linked. Aubrey's grip faltered. She's bluffing, Lorraine hissed. No, I said softly. I'm not. The hammer wavered mid-air, her arm trembling. You think I won't, Aubrey whispered. I think you're scared, I said. And you should be. The words hung between us. Then outside, faint but rising, came the sound of sirens. First one, then another, echoing through the neighborhood. The color drained from Lorraine's face. You called the cops. No, I said, voice calm. They called me. Her lips parted, confusion flickering into panic. She didn't know that every time my body cam recorded a physical altercation, a backup copy uploaded automatically to the Fort Liberty network. One of the CID officers monitoring the feed must have recognized the address and sent Fayetteville PD. The sirens grew louder, bouncing off the garage walls. Aubrey lowered the hammer tears filling her eyes. Mom! What did we do? Lorraine spun toward the door, voice cracking. You idiot! You brought them here! I flexed my wrist, testing the rope loose enough to slip free with a twist and pivot. My training kicked in steady breath. Low stance, stay aware of exits. Lorraine, I said quietly. It's over. No, it's not, she hissed, grabbing the hammer from Aubrey. The moment she raised it, the garage door burst open. Red and blue lights flashed across the walls, flooding the room in color. Officer Givens's voice thundered through the chaos. Drop it now! The hammer clanged against the concrete, rolling to my feet. I didn't move. Lorraine stood frozen, chest-heaving mascara streaking down her cheeks. Aubrey was already crying, hands over her face. The officers surrounded them in seconds, voices overlapping commands, radio chatter, the metallic click of handcuffs. One of them cut the rope from my wrists. Ma'am, are you hurt? Givens asked. I shook my head slowly. Just tired, he nodded. We got a call from Fort Liberty Command. They saw everything. I met his eyes. Everything. Yes, ma'am, he said. Everything. Lorraine tried to speak, words dissolving into sobs. She trapped us. She wanted this. I stood adjusting my sleeves, feeling the rope burn fade from my skin. You tied me up, I said softly. Your words, not mine, will tell the story. The sirens outside began to fade as more units arrived. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the driveway, faces pale in the flashing light. I could feel their eyes on me, curious, confused, maybe even sympathetic. But none of that mattered. The truth was recorded, time-stamped, undeniable. As they led Lorraine and Aubrey toward the squad car, she turned back, voice shaking with fury. You think you've won? I met her gaze. No, I said quietly. I think justice just started. The garage smelled of metal and fear, the chair still sitting in the center like a monument to her control. I stepped over the fallen hammer, walked out into the night air, and let the flashing lights wash over me until the noise became a kind of silence. The hammer hit the concrete with a hollow clang that echoed through the garage. For half a second, everything froze. Lorraine's breath caught Aubrey's hands, trembled mid-air. My pulse thundered in my ears. Then came the wail of sirens, close now, so close the vibrations ran through the floor beneath my boots. The red light from the squad car strobed through the narrow garage windows, painting the walls in alternating flashes of crimson and blue. My wrists were still bound with the rope rough against my skin. I could feel every fiber cut into my palms, but I didn't fight it. Years of training taught me when to wait. The sound of doors slamming shut outside broke the stillness. Commands echoed across the driveway, firm, practiced, professional. Fayetteville PD. Step away from the subject. Lorraine spun toward the door, eyes wide. "Oh my God, she called the police?" she shouted, voice pitched high with panic. "She's lost her mind." The garage door rattled as heavy boots approached. Aubrey stumbled back, tears streaking her face. "Mom, what do we do?" Lorraine's answer came as a hiss. "Say she attacked us. Say she went crazy." "What? Do it!" she snapped, grabbing Aubrey's shoulders hard enough to make her flinch. The door burst open before she could say another word. Officer Givens led the entry flashlight beam slicing through the shadows. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. Two more officers fanned out behind him, weapons drawn but angled low. I sat still, my breathing steady. "She attacked us!" Lorraine screamed, her voice cracking like glass. "She tried to hit me. Look at her. She's violent." Givens's light landed on me, still seated in the chair, wrists tied in front of me with frayed rope. My uniform jacket hung open just enough for the faint red light of the body cam to glimmer from the inner pocket. "Ma'am," he said calmly, stepping closer. "Are you restrained?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse but level. "They tied me up." Lorraine's voice rose to a shriek. "Liar!" She tied herself. She's insane, ma'am." Givens cut her off sharply. "I'm gonna need you to back up and keep your hands visible. You don't understand. Now." The authority in his tone left no room for argument. Lorraine froze, hands half raised, the glint of sweat shining on her forehead under the flashing lights. "Sergeant, secure her!" Givens ordered. Another officer stepped forward, guiding Lorraine toward the wall. She struggled once, then went still when the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "You can't do this," she spat. "That woman's dangerous. She's military." "Exactly," Givens said, voice even. "Which is why I'm going to handle this by the book." Aubrey whimpered in the corner, still clutching her mother's wine-stained sleeve. "I didn't mean to," Mom said. "It's okay," Givens said gently. "Just keep your hands visible, sweetheart." He turned back to me. "Ma'am, can you move your hands if you cut the rope?" I said yes. He pulled a folding knife from his belt and sliced the rope clean. The relief in my wrists stung blood rushing back into my hands. I flexed my fingers slowly, forcing composure. "You're military police, right?" he asked, glancing at the patch on my sleeve. "Captain Sloan Parker, Fort Liberty," I confirmed. "We received a call from CID," he said. "Your body cam feed went live to their system. They contacted dispatch. You're on video." I nodded once. "Everything's recorded." Lorraine thrashed against the cuffs. "You can't take that as evidence. It's illegal." "Actually," Givens replied, "it's perfectly admissible. Especially when you say break her jaw on tape." The color drained from her face. You can't. You just did," I said quietly. The garage filled with the smell of oil and panic. Aubrey slumped against the wall, sobbing now, her mascara streaked down to her jawline. "I didn't want to, I swear," she whispered. "She told me to do it. She said if I didn't." Givens raised a hand to stop her. "You can explain that downtown." The officers led her out gently, but she kept looking back at me as if searching for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe proof this nightmare was real. Lorraine went next, cursing under her breath until they guided her into the back of a squad car. I stood alone in the doorway, the cool night air washing over me. My body trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally ebbing away. Givens lingered beside me, watching the lights flicker across the street. "You handled yourself well, Captain," he said. "Most civilians wouldn't have stayed that calm." "I'm not most civilians," I said softly. "No," he agreed, smiling faintly. "You're not." He looked down at the rope still dangling from my wrist. "You want a medic to check that I'll be fine. You always say that, don't you?" "Occupational habit." He chuckled quietly, then turned serious. "CID already requested a copy of the footage. We'll submit the local report tonight. You'll want to stop by the station for your statement." "Understood. You want to press charges?" I met his eyes. "Yes." Outside, neighbors were gathered again, whispering behind hedges, cell phones glowing like fireflies. I could hear someone muttering my name. "Isn't she the Army officer?" followed by the unmistakable click of a camera shutter. It didn't matter. The truth was out. The chaos was documented, undeniable, time-stamped. I walked to my Jeep parked by the curb, the night thick with humidity and judgment. Givens called after me, "Captain, just for the record?" Yes, that was the calmest takedown I've ever seen from someone tied to a chair. I almost smiled. Discipline's part of the job. As I started the engine, the sirens faded into the distance, leaving only the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the faint hum of streetlights. My wrists still burned, my chest ached, but the weight lifting from my shoulders was unmistakable. For the first time in years, control had shifted back where it belonged. The Fayetteville Police Department was quieter than I expected for a Friday night. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly sterile and constant, the kind of sound that fills every silence when adrenaline fades. I sat in a small interview room, wrists free now, though the rope burns still marked my skin. A paper cup of water sweated onto the table. My reflection in the two-way glass looked composed, but underneath every muscle trembled with the leftover echo of restraint. Officer Givens entered first, followed by a detective in plain clothes and a CID liaison from Fort Liberty. The liaison, Special Agent Carter, nodded to me with the curt respect only soldiers give each other. "Captain Parker," he said, sliding a notepad onto the table. "We've reviewed the preliminary footage from your body cam. I'd like to go through the timeline with you." "Yes, sir." Givens pulled up a tablet and tapped play. The footage began my entry into the garage, Lorraine's voice coaxing me to sit, her false calm breaking as the rope tightened around my wrists. The audio captured every word in crisp, unforgiving clarity. Then it came, the moment the world shifted. Lorraine's voice, low and sharp, break her jaw. The words sliced through the silence of the room, even more chilling than when I'd first heard them. I didn't flinch, but Givens exhaled through his nose. "There it is," he muttered. Carter nodded. "We have her on command, the act of restraint, and the assault attempt. There's no ambiguity here." "No, sir," I said softly. "There isn't." The detective, older gray at the temples, leaned forward. "You didn't fight back?" "No," I said. I stayed seated. I wanted the recording to show restraint, not retaliation. "Smart," he said, tapping his pen. "Most people would have swung first." "I'm not most people." Givens gave a faint smile at that. "Command discipline," he said quietly, like a note of respect. The video continued, showing the moment the sirens flared in the distance, then the police entry. Lorraine's frantic accusations, the camera panning just enough to catch the hammer on the floor. When the video ended, the room fell silent again. Carter clicked the tablet off and looked at me. "Fort Liberty JAG is already drafting the interagency report," he said. "They'll treat this as a civilian assault case with military liaison oversight since you're active duty." "Understood. They'll also review the forgery evidence you collected," he added. "Your documentation will be crucial for the property case." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the paper cup. The condensation made it slick, like it could slip from my grasp the moment I let my guard down. The door opened then, and a voice I didn't expect filled the space. "Can I talk to her?" Lorraine's voice, small now raw from crying. I turned. 2 officers stood behind her. She was cuffed, mascara-streaked hair disheveled. The woman who had once strutted through that house like a queen now looked like someone stripped of her costume. "Please," she said, her voice cracking. "Just 1 minute." Carter exchanged a look with Givens. "Captain?" "It's fine," I said. He nodded, stepping aside. Lorraine took a single step into the room. Her eyes searched my face for something she could still manipulate, but found only exhaustion. "Sloane," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "You told her to hit me with a hammer," I said evenly. "I was scared," she said quickly. "You came in with all your threats recordings, lawyers. I thought you'd take everything." "You already did," I said. Her lip trembled. "I lost your father, too, you know." "You didn't lose him," I said. "You buried him under lies. You think you're so righteous." She snapped suddenly, the venom flashing again. "You think the Army makes you better than the rest of us. It doesn't. It just hides what's broken in you." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air like smoke. Then softly, "You know what the difference is between you and me, Lorraine?" She blinked, confused by the calm in my tone. "I built discipline," I said. "You built excuses." Carter stepped forward. "That's enough." Lorraine sagged between the officer's tears, spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Sloane. Family forgiveness, it's what he would have wanted." I looked at her for a long moment. Memories of my father's laugh echoing somewhere in the back of my mind. He'd have wanted accountability, I said quietly. That's what I'm giving him. The officers let her out. The door shut with a muted click. The silence afterward was heavier than before. Givens cleared his throat. We'll process her tonight, he said gently. Aubrey's cooperating. Said her mother forced her hand. She's young, I murmured. Let her tell the truth and rebuild from there. Carter stood collecting his files. Fort Liberty will issue a report to command by morning. Expect a follow-up for your statement on base. Yes, sir. He paused at the door. You did everything right, Captain. That composure, it's rare even among soldiers. It wasn't composure, I said quietly. It was necessity. He gave a small nod like he understood and left. When they were gone, I sat alone in the hum of the fluorescent light, staring at the now dark screen of the tablet. Break her jaw. 3 words that would echo in courtrooms' reports and maybe in my dreams for months. I exhaled slowly, counting the beats in my pulse until they steadied. The clerk brought me paperwork, a formal witness statement property seizure list, and acknowledgement of evidence. I signed each one line by line, the weight of my name feeling heavier than ever. When I reached the final signature block labeled Complainant, I paused. The ink trembled slightly as I wrote. Complainant. Victim. None of those words fit easily. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier who followed procedure. I was a daughter reclaiming truth. Givens appeared one last time, setting a brown evidence envelope on the table. Your camera, he said. Chain of custody's intact, but they'll need your verification signature. I nodded. You've got everything you need. Yeah, he said. And, Captain, yes, you're allowed to breathe now. I managed a small, tired smile. Working on it. Outside, the air had cooled. Dawn wasn't far off. A faint gray glow lined the horizon. The parking lot glistened from earlier rain, and the smell of wet asphalt hit me like memory's sharp, clean grounding. Carter was waiting by his car. I'll update Fort Liberty, he said. You should get some rest. Rest comes later, I said. I've got a report to finish. He chuckled. Still Army to the core. Always. I watched his taillights disappear into the dark before getting into my own Jeep. The seat felt unfamiliar, like I'd aged a decade in a night. I started the engine, the hum steady and familiar, and whispered to the empty air. By the book. The words steadied me more than any comfort could, because that's what justice is, slow, methodical, and unshakable. And tonight, it had finally begun to move. By the time dawn crept over Fayetteville, the adrenaline had burned away, leaving only purpose. I'd slept 3 hours, if that, back in the on-post quarters near Fort Liberty. The ache in my wrists had turned to dull bruises, but my head was clear. When the world tries to paint you as unstable, clarity becomes armor. I spent the morning in front of my laptop, spreading every file, receipt, and mortgage statement across the desk like evidence at a court-martial. The pattern was there, it just needed order. I called the civilian lawyer first. His name was Daniel Reeve, mid-40s, local reputation for being precise and unflappable. He answered on the second ring. Captain Parker. He said, his tone clipped but respectful. Officer Givens already briefed me. You have documentation, plenty, I said. And video proof of physical assault. Good, but property cases hinge on the paper, not the punches. Bring everything. 2 hours later, I sat in his downtown office, surrounded by walls lined with casebooks and certificates. He wore the look of a man who had seen too many families tear themselves apart for money. Let's start simple, he said, motioning for the stack of papers I'd brought. Mortgage bank statements, anything tied to the estate. I handed him the folder. He flipped through it silently occasionally, marking something with a pen. When he reached the mortgage documents, he frowned. You were right, he said finally. This isn't your signature. I know I said. Look at the date, January 18th, 2024. I was deployed overseas. CID can confirm. He leaned closer, pointing with the pen. Whoever did this, they traced your signature from an earlier notarized file. See the hesitation marks here. He tilted the page under the light, showing where the ink had pooled slightly. That's the pause when someone's copying, not writing naturally. I stared at the lines my name turned into evidence. Can we prove it? We can, he said, but there's more. He slid another page forward bank transfer receipts. 2 large withdrawals from the mortgage disbursement, both routed to an account under Aubrey Hawthorne, the stepdaughter, I said quietly. She's a cosigner, no, which means the bank will cooperate once we file a fraud report. That money trail is your backbone. Follow it and the house comes back to you. I nodded, forcing my breath steady. And the fake notarization state forgery, he said. That's a felony. We'll attach it to the assault case once charges finalize. So both civil and criminal, I said. He smiled faintly. Justice tends to prefer the full spectrum. From there, the rest of the morning blurred into methodical rhythm, scanning printing filing. Every document went into labeled folders, financial property, personal threats. Each one was time-stamped, cross-referenced with the body cam evidence. This wasn't revenge, it was reconstruction. By noon, I was back on post, walking across the cracked pavement toward the legal assistance office. Inside, Sergeant Kim, the paralegal, looked up from her desk. "Captain Parker," she said, voice soft but knowing. "Heard about the incident." "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "Need to file supplementary evidence to the JAG liaison for the forgery and the assault." She nodded and guided me through the paperwork. The forms were clinical, but every checkmark felt like closure taking shape. Under description of evidence, I wrote unauthorized mortgage transfer, fraudulent notarization, financial diversion to non-heir account, physical assault, documented via MP body cam. Kim raised an eyebrow. "You're not holding back." Neither did they. "Good," she said, signing off. "Command will appreciate the thoroughness." I left the office and drove to Fayetteville First National Bank. The manager, a man in a gray suit who'd probably spent the night rehearsing his apology, met me in his office. "Captain Parker," he began, wringing his hands. "We are deeply sorry for the oversight." "Spare it," I said. "Show me the authorization logs." He swallowed hard and pulled up the screen. The audit trail displayed 2 logins from the same IP address, Lorraine's home Wi-Fi. "We assumed it was you," he said weakly. She provided identification. "A driver's license." "Yes. My license was reissued last year after a base theft report," I said. "So she forged that too?" He nodded, pale. "We'll cooperate with law enforcement." "You'll do more than that," I said, keeping my voice even. "You'll freeze the account linked to those withdrawals until this case resolves. Legally, that's fraud protection protocol." He hesitated. "We'll start the process today." Good. When I left, the summer air hit me like a furnace, but underneath the heat there was something colder satisfaction. Justice wasn't loud. It was paperwork and precision. I spent the afternoon collecting the rest of the digital trail. Email archives, text logs, voicemail files. One in particular made my hand still over the keyboard. It was from Lorraine, time-stamped 2 days after my father's funeral. The subject line read, "We'll fix the will later. She won't even notice." My vision tunneled. I played the voicemail, attached her voice sharp with wine and greed. "Aubrey, listen, all we need is her signature. We'll scan it from that card she signed for the Jeep. The bank doesn't check these things. Once the refinance clears, we'll transfer the extra into my account and split it. Your father would have wanted you taken care of." The line crackled, then ended. That was it. Proof in her own words. I saved the file under evidencegloss04.wav, uploaded it to cloud storage, and duplicated it on a physical drive. At 1600 hours, I met Agent Carter again at the CID office. He stood by the printer, arms crossed. "Heard you've been busy," he said. "You could say that." Reeves sent over the audit logs. "Good work. You're building a bulletproof case, that's the idea." He smiled faintly. "You Army types, always by the book. It's what keeps us alive," I said. He grew serious then. "They'll try to paint this as a domestic misunderstanding. Be ready for that narrative." "They can try," I said, handing him a flash drive. "Here's her voicemail notarized copy and the email header metadata." He took it carefully. "Captain," he said, "you're turning this from a family fight into a textbook prosecution." It stopped being a family fight when she forged a dead man's house. He nodded once. "Well said." I drove home at dusk, the streets of Fayetteville glowing gold in the fading sun. My father's voice lingered somewhere in memory. "Always check twice. Mistakes are quiet until they cost you." This mistake had cost her everything. Back at my temporary quarters, I laid out the files across the kitchen table: financial records, call logs, voice transcripts. Each piece of paper was a brick in a wall she couldn't climb. Cold, methodical. That's what justice needed to be. I looked down at my hands, remembering the way they'd once trembled when she tied them. Now they were steady, unflinching. For the first time since he died, I felt like my father would have been proud. Not because I was winning, but because I hadn't lost myself doing it. The courthouse mediation room smelled faintly of varnish and old air conditioning. Long tables formed a hollow square under the overhead lights. On one side sat Lorraine Hare, tied tight, eyes ringed with fatigue, but still painted with defiance. Beside her, Aubrey twisted a tissue in her lap, her lawyer whispering something that sounded rehearsed. On the opposite side sat me uniform-pressed posture-straight folder of evidence stacked with precision. Daniel Reeve. My attorney stood beside me, calm as ever. He laid a single flash drive on the table like a loaded weapon. "We'll start with the footage," he said to the judge, who nodded. "Proceed." The clerk dimmed the lights and the projector flickered to life. The video opened with a soft mechanical click, the body cam's automatic timestamp. My voice sounded detached, professional. Lorraine's, however, cut through the quiet like a whip. "Let's talk privately." The footage showed her hand looping rope around my wrists, the chair creaking. Then the phrase that had become the axis of this case filled the room: break her jaw. The sound was sharp, undeniable. The hammer gleamed under the fluorescent bulb. Aubrey's gasp followed, then the thud of the hammer dropping. Someone in the courtroom coughed softly. The rest was silence. You could hear the hum of the projector as the scene played the arrival of the police officer Givens's calm command, Lorraine's frantic shouts. "She attacked us." Then my voice steady clear. "Everything you say is being recorded." When the video ended, the screen froze on the image of Lorraine's face, wide-eyed, pale, caught mid-denial. The clerk turned the lights back on. For a moment, nobody moved. The judge adjusted her glasses slowly. "This recording," she said, voice even, "was verified by both the Fayetteville Police Department and Fort Liberty CID. "Yes, Your Honor," Reeve replied. "Chain of custody intact, time-stamped, no alterations. Supplemental evidence includes the mortgage documentation and bank statements submitted last week." He gestured, and I slid the printed exhibits forward. "These show forged signatures and financial transfers from the refinance payout to an account in Ms. Hawthorne's daughter's name." The judge scanned the first page, her brows rising slightly. Lorraine's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client was under emotional distress at the time she feared for her safety." Reeve smiled without warmth. "Then it's fortunate Captain Parker's camera recorded who tied who." The judge nodded once. "Play it again," she said. The video replayed from the moment Lorraine grabbed the rope. Her tone had changed from charm to command, every lie peeling itself apart. "You're unstable. This is for your own safety." Then again louder: "Break her jaw." Aubrey's quiet sob broke the silence of the room. Her tissue crumpled in her fist as she leaned forward. "I told her to stop," she whispered hoarsely. "I told her, but she wouldn't." Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, whispering for her to stay silent, but the words were already out. Lorraine shot her a look so sharp it could cut steel. "Don't you dare!" she hissed. "Enough," the judge said sharply. "Ms. Hawthorne, control yourself." Lorraine's lawyer rubbed his temple. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess." "Denied," the judge said flatly. "We're not pausing truth." Reeve glanced at me and gave the faintest nod. It wasn't triumph, it was confirmation. I opened the next folder. "Your Honor, if I may, this is Exhibit C, an email chain between the defendant and her daughter retrieved via court order from their shared account." He handed copies across the table. Lorraine's lawyer flipped through them, face paling with each page. "My client contests the authenticity." "The ISP doesn't," Reeve cut in smoothly. "We have metadata." And attached to the same email thread is an audio file from Ms. Hawthorne's voicemail. He gestured to the clerk, who pressed play. Lorraine's voice filled the speakers unmistakable. "All we need is her signature. We'll scan it from that Jeep card. Once the refinance clears, we'll transfer the extra into my account and split it." The recording clicked off. The air went still again. Even the judge sat back in her chair, lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't a misunderstanding," she said finally. "It's calculated." Lorraine opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Aubrey buried her face in her hands. "Mom, stop!" she said between sobs. "Just stop! Aubrey, don't you dare! You made me do it!" The outburst ripped through the courtroom. Every head turned. The girl's voice cracked, shaking under the weight of months of fear. "You told me to hit her to make it look real. I didn't want to, but you screamed at me. You said we'd lose everything if I didn't listen." "That's enough," Lorraine shouted, her voice breaking into hysteria. The bailiff moved a step closer just in case. Aubrey sobbed harder. "I'm sorry," she whispered, looking at me through tears. I didn't know she'd gone that far. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The judge rapped her gavel once. "Order." Her gaze moved from Aubrey to Lorraine, then to the evidence displayed on the table, the rope, the forged mortgage, the audio files, the video still paused on Lorraine's command. "I've seen family disputes," she said quietly, "but this is an orchestration of deceit, Ms. Hawthorne. Your actions constitute assault, fraud, and coercion." Lorraine shook her head, muttering, "No, no, no," as if denial could erase proof. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering frantically, but she barely heard him. Captain Parker, the judge continued, "You've shown remarkable restraint. The court acknowledges your composure and the professionalism displayed during this incident. Your evidence has been submitted to the district attorney for formal charges." I inclined my head. "Thank you, Your Honor." Reeve gathered the files, neatly sliding the flash drive back into its case. The judge rose. "Court is adjourned for review and sentencing recommendations. Ms. Hawthorne, you will remain in custody pending the next hearing." Lorraine's voice cracked thin and ragged. "Sloan, please," she cried as officers approached. "You can't let them do this. We're family." I looked at her. The woman who had rewritten my father's will turned his house into a fortress of lies and ordered her daughter to hurt me and said quietly, "Family doesn't tie you to a chair." She went silent, lips trembling as the officers led her out. Aubrey followed a few steps behind, crying into her hands, her lawyer murmuring about plea deals and statements. When the room emptied, Reeve closed the final folder. "You held your ground, Captain," he said. "You didn't need to raise your voice once." "Truth speaks louder," I said. He smiled faintly. "That line'll look good in the report." Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon light was golden sharp against the glass windows. Reporters were waiting by the steps, microphones ready, but I walked past them without a word. Justice didn't need a headline, it already had a record. At the bottom of the courthouse stairs, I paused. My reflection shimmered faintly in a parked cruiser's window, calm, steady, unbroken. For the first time, the phrase that had haunted me break her jaw had lost its power. It had become evidence, truth, closure. I took a deep breath, the air thick with summer heat and the faint hum of cicadas. Somewhere behind me, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy metallic thud, a chapter sealing shut. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks later. Fayetteville's courthouse was quieter that day. No reporters, no crowd, just the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of polished shoes on marble. Justice rarely ends with a bang. It ends with paperwork. Lorraine sat at the defense table, wrists free, but posture rigid. The weeks had changed her. Her once perfect hair now hung limp, her confidence had eroded into brittle composure. Aubrey sat beside her younger, smaller, somehow clutching the edge of her chair like a child about to face a school principal. Across from them, I sat with Reeve. Hands folded, uniform pressed, calm, detached. The judge entered, gavel tapping once for silence. "Case number 24-3126, she began. State of North Carolina versus Lorraine Hawthorne and Aubrey Hawthorne. Charges assault in the second-degree forgery of legal documents and unlawful restraint." The clerk read the formal record, every word landing like a drumbeat. When the judge looked up, her expression was steady but tired. "I have reviewed the evidence, including the video documentation, sworn statements, and financial records submitted by Captain Parker. I have also reviewed the defendant's plea submissions." Reeve leaned toward me, whispering, "They took the plea deal. No trial." I nodded. Ms. Hawthorne, the judge, continued, "You pled guilty to all 3 charges in exchange for probation and restitution. Ms. Aubrey Hawthorne, you pled guilty to one count of unlawful restraint and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Lorraine's jaw twitched. She hated the word guilty. The judge folded her hands. Given your lack of prior criminal record and Captain Parker's request for leniency on behalf of the younger defendant, the court issues the following sentence. 6 months of supervised probation for both parties, mandatory restitution, and forfeiture of all claim to the property located at 427 Ashbrook Drive. The room was still. Lorraine blinked once as though she hadn't heard correctly. Restitution includes repayment of the fraudulent loan proceeds, the judge continued, and the return of the estate to its rightful heir, Captain Sloane Parker. I didn't smile. Not once. Justice didn't need joy, it needed precision. The judge turned to me. Captain Parker, would you like to make a statement? I stood my boots quiet against the tile. Yes, Your Honor. Only this justice doesn't need noise. It just needs truth. The judge's eyes softened. A fitting statement, Captain. She looked at Lorraine one last time. Ms. Hawthorne, you nearly destroyed your family out of greed. I hope this silence teaches you what control never could. With that, she adjourned the session. The gavel struck and it was over. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt final. Lorraine sagged in her chair, colorless. Aubrey covered her face and wept quietly. Reeve gathered our files and handed me the final copy of the ruling. You did it, he said softly. Legally. Cleanly. By the book, I said. Always. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon air felt warmer than before. The world kept turning indifferent. Cars passed, people talked, life went on. I stood by the steps for a moment, breathing in the weightless quiet that comes after months of noise. The next morning, I met Agent Carter at Fort Liberty's JAG office. He handed me an envelope stamped with the Army seal. Command wanted this delivered in person, he said, his tone even but respectful. I opened it. Inside was a single-page commendation signed by Colonel Whitaker. For professional composure under domestic duress and adherence to Army values in civilian jurisdiction, Captain Sloane Parker is hereby commended. At the bottom was a simple line handwritten by the colonel. Discipline is not silence, it's control under fire. I read it twice. It wasn't about medals or recognition. It was validation that restraint, not retaliation, had been the right path. Carter watched me fold the paper carefully. Not everyone could have done what you did, he said. They would have swung back. That's the difference between justice and vengeance, I said. Justice leaves room for peace. He nodded slowly. What about them? Probation, I said. The house returns next week. Aubrey's cooperating. She might get her record sealed if she completes counseling. And Lorraine. 6 months to think, I said, maybe longer in her head. He exhaled through his nose. Sometimes I wish more soldiers remembered that control wins more wars than anger. It's easier to remember when you've lived both. Carter gave a half smile. You planning to stay in Fayetteville after this? For a while, I said. I owe my father that. When he left, I sat for a long time in the quiet office, sunlight filtering through the blinds, the smell of coffee and old paper grounding me. The commendation lay beside my notebook, the ink still drying. I thought of the phrase I'd written at the top of my first statement weeks ago by the book. It had become a mantra, one that saved me from losing myself to rage. The next day, I drove to the property clerk's office to finalize the deed transfer. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, smiled warmly when she handed me the new title. Captain Parker. She said you must be proud to have this back. Pride isn't the word, I said. Relieved, maybe. Grateful. Well, she said kindly, it's good to see decency win for once. I nodded. It does quietly. When I returned to Ashbrook Drive that afternoon, the gate stood open for the first time in months. The private property sign was gone, taken down by the court's enforcement order. The house looked tired but familiar, like an old soldier returning from battle. I stepped onto the porch and ran my hand along the railing. My father had sanded that wood himself, every groove a reminder of his patience. Inside, the air was stale dust motes drifting through the light from the front window. I opened every curtain, every door, until sunlight filled the rooms again. Lorraine's furniture was gone, the walls bare, but the silence felt honest, now no longer haunted by deceit. I found one forgotten thing in the corner of the living room, my father's toolbox dented but intact. Inside, under a layer of rusted wrenches, was his old Zippo lighter engraved with the words, "One truth, one standard." I smiled faintly. It had survived everything. I pocketed it and walked out onto the porch. Across the street, a neighbor waved Mr. Harlan, the retired Air Force mechanic who'd lived there since I was a kid. "Heard you got the place back," he said. "About time someone decent owned it again." "Thanks," I said. "Took a while." "Justice usually does," he replied. I stood there a long time after he left, listening to the cicadas hum as the sun dipped low over Fayetteville. The war was over, not loud, not violent, but won through patience and proof. That night back at Fort Liberty, I placed the commendation in a simple frame and set it on my desk beside my father's photograph. His smile in that picture was small knowing. For the first time, I understood it. Justice didn't need applause or revenge. It needed steady hands, clear eyes, and the courage to let truth speak louder than pain. I whispered to the quiet room, "You'd be proud, Dad." And for once, I believed it. 3 months later, the North Carolina summer had turned to a gentler shade of gold. The porch that once felt like a battlefield now smelled of cedar and lemon oil, freshly cleaned and calm. I had fallen into a rhythm morning PT on base afternoon reports, evenings tending to the garden behind the house. Routine was peace, and peace was finally familiar again. Until that afternoon. I was reviewing case notes for the base's new family advocacy outreach program when I heard the soft scrape of gravel outside, the sound of slow, uneven footsteps. I looked up through the window and froze. Lorraine stood at the gate, or what was left of her. The woman I remembered, perfect hair, perfect nails, perfectly cruel, was gone. Her face was drawn, her eyes hollow beneath dark circles. She looked thinner by at least 20 pounds, her once red blouse now faded pink, wrinkled, and hanging off her shoulders like loose skin. She clutched the fence post for balance. For a second, she just stood there, staring through the gate, as if she didn't know whether to knock or collapse. Then she whispered barely audible through the summer air, "Sloan, please." I stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking softly beneath my boots. I was in uniform that day, full-duty dress pressed immaculate. The heat shimmered off the concrete, catching the gold in my captain's bars. Her eyes flickered to them, then away. "I need help," she said, voice breaking on the second word. Her fingers gripped the gate, tighter knuckles white. "Please." I stayed still, hands clasped behind my back, the way soldiers do when they're standing before something they refuse to let move them. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "There's a restraining order. You remember that." She started, but her breath hitched. "They cut my benefits." Aubrey moved out. "I don't have anyone." "You have probation," I said. "You have restitution payments and mandatory counseling." "I can't keep up," she said, voice trembling. "They won't let me work. Nobody wants to hire someone with a record. I just thought maybe you could—" "What?" I asked, the edge in my voice finally showing. "Fix it. Erase it." Her face crumpled. "I just need a place to stay for a few days. Just until I figure things out. You have space. Please, Sloan. I'm sick. I'm tired." For a moment, a flicker of the old instinct tugged at me, the one that wanted to help people even when they didn't deserve it. But it passed. I stepped down from the porch, the gravel crunching under my boots. I stopped a few feet from the gate, close enough to see the trimmer in her hands. "Step away from my property," I said evenly. The words hung between us, calm but absolute. She blinked like she hadn't heard right. What step away? From my property, I repeated each syllable, slow, measured, deliberate. She shook her head, tears spilling down her face. "Sloan, I didn't mean to—" "You meant to control," I said. "You meant to humiliate. You meant to take everything my father built and turn it into something ugly. Don't pretend it was confusion. It was choice." "I was desperate," she whispered. "So was I said. "But I didn't destroy anyone to survive." Her knees buckled and she fell against the gate with a choked sound. "Please," she said again, softer this time. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." The apology hit differently now. It didn't sting or satisfy. It just existed like background noise. "You're 3 months too late," I said. "You had your chance to make things right when you lied in that courtroom when you still had your daughter beside you." She sobbed quietly, face buried in her hands. "Aubrey won't talk to me," she said. "She blames me for everything." "She's right," I said. Lorraine looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything." "You're wrong," I said. "I understand exactly what that feels like. The difference is I earned my peace back. You tried to steal yours." I stepped closer to the fence, lowering my voice until it was steady enough to cut through the trembling in hers. "You need to leave Lorraine. Now." Her lip trembled. "Where will I go? That's not for me to decide." "Please," she whispered. "I'm not the same person." "No," I said. "You're just facing the mirror now." She tried to stand but stumbled, catching herself on the post again. Her breathing was shallow, her voice barely more than a rasp. "I don't have anyone left." I looked at her for a long moment, at the hollow version of the woman who once told me I wasn't family, who ordered her daughter to break me like furniture. There was no satisfaction in seeing her broken, just distance. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed a number I'd memorized too well, the Fayetteville Social Services Emergency Outreach Line. "This is Captain Sloan Parker, Fort Liberty," I said. "I have a woman at my address previously convicted under domestic assault and fraud, currently in distress. She needs immediate welfare assistance and transport." Lorraine's eyes widened as I spoke. "You're calling the police?" "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "People who can actually help you." She shook her head weakly. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," I said. "It's structure, something you never learned." The dispatcher confirmed the address and said a crisis team would arrive in 15 minutes. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Lorraine tried to speak again, but the words dissolved into a dry sob. She sank to her knees, forehead pressed against the gatepost, like it was the only thing holding her upright. I watched in silence, not out of cruelty, but because sometimes silence is the only mercy left. The sound of approaching sirens, different this time, softer, the muted hum of an ambulance echoed down the street. A white county van pulled up near the curb. 2 social workers stepped out calm and kind-faced. One knelt beside her, speaking in a low tone. The other glanced toward me, clipboard in hand. "Captain Parker." "Yes. Thank you for calling," she said. "We've got her from here." I nodded once. Lorraine looked up at me, eyes red, face pale. "You hate me," she said quietly. "No," I replied. "I just finally stopped letting you hurt me." She sobbed again, but this time there was no fight in it, just exhaustion. The social workers guided her gently to her feet, helping her into the van. Before the door closed, she looked back at me one last time, mouth trembling as if she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. I gave her nothing but a steady gaze. Not forgiveness, not condemnation, just closure. The van pulled away slowly, the sound fading into the hum of cicadas and the distant buzz of traffic. The gravel under my boots crunched as I turned back toward the porch. The afternoon light caught the edge of the porch swing, the one my father built. I sat there, hands folded, watching the gate swing slightly in the breeze she'd left behind. There was no triumph, only stillness. After a while, I walked inside. The house felt larger, quieter, like it had exhaled after years of tension. I poured a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched the sunlight drift across the empty yard. Lorraine's absence didn't fill the space with joy or relief. Just peace, the quiet kind that doesn't need witnesses. My phone buzzed once a message from JAG headquarters confirming the commendation had been added to my official record. At the bottom, Colonel Whitaker had written a single line: "Justice without hatred is the hardest kind." I set the phone down, looked out at the street, and whispered softly to no one, and the only kind worth keeping. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying away the last echo of her voice. The gate creaked shut with a faint metallic click, final and clean. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and let the silence stand. It wasn't vengeance. It was distance. And that was enough. The sun had barely risen when I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, the air cool enough to carry the scent of damp earth and early grass. It had been a week since Lorraine showed up at the gate, and the quiet that followed felt almost sacred. For the first time in months, there were no phone calls, no court updates, no reminders of what had happened. Just stillness. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard the soft scrape of a lawnmower engine shutting down across the street. Mr. Harlan, the retired Air Force mechanic who'd lived in that brick house for 40 years, was walking up my driveway, hat in hand, his limp more noticeable than usual in the morning light. "Morning, Captain," he said, his gravelly voice carrying the kind of warmth that only comes from old soldiers. "Morning, Mr. Harlan." He stopped at the edge of the porch steps, nodding toward the gate. "Saw that county van the other day. Social workers. Figured it was her." I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I heard the sirens that night the first time it all went down," he said quietly. "Didn't know the details, but I knew from the sound you'd handle it right." He looked up at me, then his eyes steady proud in that quiet way only veterans have when they see something done with discipline. "A lot of folks would have gone swinging. But you stayed clean." I smiled faintly. "Training helps." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Character does." He shifted his weight, sighing. "You know my wife used to run a shelter here in Fayetteville. For women getting out of bad homes, she'd have liked you. Said what mattered most wasn't just getting out, it was showing the world you could still stand straight afterward." I looked out at the yard, the grass trimmed neatly, now the old oak casting dappled light across the porch. "Standing straight's the easy part," I said. "Staying open after everything, that's the hard one." He chuckled softly. "Then maybe that's your next mission." Before I could ask what he meant, he reached into his back pocket and handed me a faded brochure. Military Outreach Against Domestic Abuse. The logo was simple, 2 hands clasped over a shield. "They're looking for volunteers," he said, "instructors, mentors, folks who can bridge the gap between civilian and service life. You'd fit right in." I ran my thumb over the brochure, the print worn from age. "When'd you get this?" "Years ago," he said. "Found a stack cleaning out the garage. Figured maybe someone like you would actually use it." I stared at the paper, then back at him. "You always hand out missions like this?" "Only to people who don't realize they're already on one." He grinned, tipped his hat, and walked back toward his yard, leaving me standing there with the morning sun warming the back of my neck. That afternoon, I called the number on the brochure. A woman named Lisa Moreno, the program coordinator, answered. Her voice was brisk but kind. "We are funded through a joint effort between the base and county services," she explained. "Mostly, we train survivors, dependents, and even some spouses of active duty members. We also run self-defense and legal resource workshops." "You said you're at Fort Liberty." "Yes," I said. "Military Police Captain Parker." There was a pause. "Oh," she said, the tone in her voice shifting from polite to purposeful. "I read about your case. You're exactly who we need." I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready to be the face of anything." "You don't have to be," she said gently. "You just have to show up, tell the truth. People will listen." So I did. 2 weeks later, I walked into a community center off Bragg Boulevard wearing jeans and a plain black t-shirt instead of a uniform. The room smelled of coffee and paper. About 20 people sat in folding chairs, some military spouses, some civilians, a few veterans. Their faces carried that quiet fatigue I recognized too well, the aftermath of being hurt by people they once trusted. Lisa introduced me briefly. "This is Captain Sloan Parker. She's here to talk about restraint, what it means, what it costs, and why it matters." I didn't have a speech prepared, just a memory. 3 months ago, I sat tied to a chair in a garage while someone I called family ordered me to be hurt. I had every reason to fight back, but I didn't, not because I was weak, but because sometimes strength isn't in the fight. It's in staying calm long enough to prove the truth. A few heads nodded. One woman wiped her eyes. "The hardest part of surviving isn't the bruises or the fear," I continued. "It's the silence that follows when the noise stops and you realize no one is coming to make sense of it but you." A veteran in the back, an older woman with a cane, raised her hand. "How do you get past the anger?" I thought about it before answering. "You don't get past it," I said. "You repurpose it. You turn it into focus. Anger's like current. It'll power you or burn you depending on how you ground it." Afterward, Lisa approached me as people lingered to talk. You should lead a class, she said. Self-defense, maybe. Basic tactics. Something to give them back a sense of control. I hesitated, looking around the room at the women laughing softly now, sharing stories, comparing scars that didn't show. Maybe, I said. Not military style. Civilian tempo, but grounded in confidence. Exactly, she said. Something real. The next week, I filed the volunteer paperwork through the base and began organizing a pilot class. We called it the Quiet Line. It wasn't about combat, it was about presence. Each Saturday morning, I'd set up mats in the gym, showing women how to stabilize their stance, break a grip control breathing. You're not here to fight, I told them every session. You're here to reclaim space. Word spread quickly. Within a month, the class doubled in size. We added evening sessions for spouses of deployed soldiers, then teenagers from the local high school. I partnered with JAG to provide free legal awareness briefings afterward. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered. One evening after class, Lisa came over while I was rolling up the mats. "You've got something special here," she said. "They listen to you because you don't speak from theory, you speak from survival." I shrugged. I just show them what I wish someone had told me earlier. Control isn't coldness. It's safety. She smiled. "We're thinking of expanding the program statewide. Would you consider representing Fort Liberty?" The thought made me pause. I looked around at the gym, the scuffed floors, the faint smell of chalk and sweat, the hum of ceiling fans. If it helps one person walk into their own storm and come out steady, I said, then yes. That night as I drove home, I saw Mr. Harlan sitting on his porch, a glass of sweet tea in hand. He waved me over. "Heard you're teaching now," he said. "Word travels fast." "Small town," I replied, smiling. Lisa's program needed someone to scare the lazy recruits straight. He laughed the kind of low, hearty laugh that carried across the street. "You know," he said, "when my wife passed, I stopped believing good things could grow from pain. Then I watched you move back into that house, saw the lights come on again." Guess she was right. Resilience is contagious. I sat on the porch rail beside him, the night air soft with crickets. "It doesn't feel like resilience," I said. "It feels like maintenance, just keeping things upright." "That's all resilience ever is," he said. "Keeping upright long enough for peace to find you." We sat there for a long time without speaking, just two veterans watching the quiet neighborhood breathe again. Before heading back across the street, he looked over his shoulder and said, "You did right, Captain. For all of us." After he left, I stood in the doorway of my home, the lights glowing warm against the dusk. I thought of my father's words again, always check twice. I had checked everything. My evidence, my patience, my heart. What remained now wasn't vengeance. It was service. The next morning, I unlocked the community gym early, the smell of rubber mats and detergent greeting me like old friends. One of the women from my class, Sarah, a young mother, arrived early. "Morning, Captain," she said, smiling nervously. "You ready?" I nodded. "Always." As I adjusted her stance and showed her how to block a grab, I realized something quiet but powerful had shifted. The house wasn't just a symbol anymore. The uniform wasn't armor. Both had become tools to build something new, a world where discipline replaced fear. After class ended, Sarah hugged me unexpectedly. "You made me feel strong again," she said softly. I smiled. "You already were. You just forgot how to stand." When I locked up and stepped outside, the morning light cut across the field, golden and wide. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. But this time, it didn't tighten my chest. It reminded me that even in chaos, control can be learned, peace can be taught, and strength can be quiet. Mr. Harlan was right. I hadn't just survived. I'd rebuilt something worth keeping. The house was silent again, but this time the silence didn't feel haunted. It felt earned. The court had officially transferred ownership 3 weeks earlier, and most of Lorraine's furniture had already been hauled away. What remained wasn't junk, it was residue. Dust on the baseboards, faint perfume in the curtains. The ghosts of old conversations pressed into the walls. I spent the morning sorting through what was left. The air smelled of cardboard and lemon cleaner. Outside, cicadas hummed in the heat, their steady rhythm reminding me that life moves on whether we're ready or not. The living room was half empty now, boxes lined along the wall labeled "Keep, Donate, and Burn." I started with my father's study. The room hadn't changed much since he died. His old desk still sat near the window covered in papers, yellowed from the humidity. The faint groove from where his coffee mug used to rest was still visible on the wood. I ran a hand over it, feeling the indentation like a scar. Under the desk, I found his wooden clock, the one he built himself out of oak when I was 16. It had stopped at 9:17 the night he died. I wound it gently, the gears creaking, but it stayed still. "Guess time stopped for you, old man," I whispered. I set it aside carefully beside a stack of letters tied with frayed string. My mother's handwriting. Letters she'd written him before deployment. Faded ink, soft paper words like, "Come home safe," and "The porch isn't the same without you." I read one, then another until the words blurred. I didn't cry. The tears had already been spent months ago in the sterile light of a courtroom. This was something different acceptance. Next to the letters beneath a pile of useless receipts and manuals, I found something that didn't belong. A folded sheet of paper, stiff and smudged its edges, still faintly creased from where it had once been notarized. I unfolded it and stared at the title. Property Transfer Authorization, Ashbrook Residence. My name was printed neatly on the signature line forged in a familiar but wrong tilt. I remembered this document. It had been the first clue in everything that followed. The fake signature that started the storm. I turned it over. On the back, in my father's handwriting, was a note I'd never seen before. "Sloan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to explain. The house is yours. Always was. Trust the truth, not their noise." "Dad!" I sank to my knees on the floor, paper trembling in my hands. My throat tightened, not from grief, but from the sudden fierce wave of clarity. He had known. He must have seen what Lorraine was capable of, even then. He'd left proof, not for the lawyers, but for me. The sun shifted through the blinds, lighting the page like an old photograph. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my pocket. In the backyard, the oak tree still stood tall, its branches spreading wide over the porch. He used to sit under it every evening after dinner, carving wood or cleaning tools. I walked outside, the summer air thick but calm. The ground beneath the oak was soft from last night's rain. I knelt there with a small trowel and began to dig, not deep, just enough for a letter-sized envelope. I placed the forged deed and my father's note together inside a zippered plastic pouch, then lowered it into the earth. It wasn't about hiding evidence. It was about letting go. "You were right, Dad," I murmured. "Truth doesn't need a crowd." The wind stirred through the branches' leaves, whispering like distant applause. I filled the hole, patted the dirt flat, and placed one of his old brass bolts on top, a small marker heavy enough to stay humble enough to disappear into the soil. When I stood, I realized how still everything was. No anger, no echo of Lorraine's voice, no weight pressing down on the walls. Just peace. Inside, I continued packing. I found his service medals tucked in a drawer, the ribbon slightly frayed. The smell of his aftershave still clung faintly to the box. I set it aside next to the clock and letters, things worth keeping, not because they held value, but because they held memory. As the day went on, the house grew lighter. The echoes faded with every empty box. I opened the windows wide, letting sunlight pour in, chasing out the last traces of bitterness. In the kitchen, I paused by the old counter where Lorraine used to stand, glass of wine in hand, pretending to belong. For the first time, her shadow didn't linger there. The space felt neutral, like a wound finally closed. Around sunset, I walked the perimeter one last time, checking locks, testing the porch steps. My father's tools were still in the garage, lined up in perfect order the way he'd always kept them. I left them that way. Some legacies don't need to be rebuilt. They just need to be maintained. As dusk deepened, I brewed a pot of tea and sat on the porch with the wooden clock beside me. The air was warm cicadas giving way to crickets. The first stars blinked awake above Fayetteville. I wound the clock one last time and gave it a gentle tap. To my surprise, the second hand twitched, then began to move. Tick, pause, tick. Slowly, deliberately, it found rhythm again. I laughed softly, the sound catching me off guard. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Either way, it was enough. When I closed my eyes, I saw my father as he'd been sitting under this same tree sun, on his face, smiling at something simple. He never raised his voice, never preached. He just lived steady. That steadiness had saved me more than once. Inside, I placed the clock on the mantel, its quiet ticking filling the empty space with something alive again. I took one last look around. The walls, the floors, the worn paint, all of it was scarred but standing. Just like me. The house was empty now, but not hollow. It had become what it was meant to be, again a home. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the porch lamp. Before stepping out, I whispered to the air, "Rest easy, Dad. It's all back where it belongs." As I walked down the steps, the oak leaves rustled again, soft and slow like an answer. The house behind me stayed still, breathing quietly in the summer night. It no longer carried the weight of the past. It carried only time and the sound of a clock that had finally decided to run again. By late August, the Carolina air had turned heavy again, thick with humidity that clung to every surface. I drove through the gates of Fort Liberty just as the morning sun cut across the motor pool, painting long shadows over rows of parked Humvees. The gate guards saluted as I passed. The gesture still felt strange after months of being seen as the woman from the headlines. The Army has its own rumor mill faster than the internet, sharper than a blade, and somehow the story of my domestic standoff had traveled from Fayetteville all the way to brigade headquarters. But the look on the soldiers' faces wasn't pity. It was respect. Quiet, measured respect. I parked near the MP Company HQ and took a long breath before stepping inside. The familiar scent of oil coffee and polished floors met me like an old rhythm. It felt good to be back where hierarchy made sense, where orders were given, followed, and documented, where truth didn't depend on who could shout the loudest. Captain Lily Chin. My company commander was waiting near the operations desk, arms crossed, grin half hidden. "Back from civilian chaos, huh?" she said. "Back from the wild," I answered. She studied me for a moment. "You look steadier." "Feels that way," I said. Paperwork wrapped, hearings done, restraining order finalized. "And the house quiet," I said simply. "Just how I like it." She nodded, then gestured toward the hallway. "Colonel Whitaker wants to see you. Bring your cap." My pulse quickened, but my expression stayed flat. The colonel didn't summon people for casual chats. His office on the second floor overlooking the training yard was the kind of place where silence spoke louder than rank. I knocked twice, heard his deep voice say, "Enter." Colonel Whitaker sat behind a mahogany desk reading from a printed report. His uniform was immaculate silver eagle pins catching the morning light. Without looking up, he said, "Captain Parker at ease." I stood still anyway. Old habits. "Sir," I acknowledged. He set down the paper and leaned back in his chair. "You've been through hell these past months." I didn't respond. He nodded slightly as if confirming something to himself. "I've read every report, CID transcripts, Fayetteville PD cooperation logs, JAG coordination notes, even the commendation from the civilian court for your composure." He paused, then met my eyes. "You handled it as a soldier, not a victim. That's rare." I wasn't sure how to reply. "Thank you, sir," I managed. "I didn't do it for the record." "I know," he said. "That's exactly why it matters." He stood, walked to the window, hands behind his back. "You followed procedure under duress. You collected evidence, restrained force, maintained discipline even when personally threatened. You protected yourself without crossing the line. That's textbook professionalism." I swallowed hard, a flicker of emotion tightening my throat. "Sir, I just did what the uniform required." He turned back the corners of his mouth, twitching slightly. "You did what integrity required. The uniform just amplified it." From a file on his desk, he pulled out a small envelope stamped with a green seal. "Headquarters forwarded this yesterday." He handed it to me. Inside was an official memorandum typed crisp and unmistakable. "Recommendation for award Army Commendation Medal ARCOM. For professional composure and ethical conduct under civilian legal duress." I stared at it, reading the words twice before I trusted them. The colonel watched quietly. "You'll get it at next month's brigade ceremony," he said. "No speeches. Just respect." "Sir," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he said. "Just keep doing what you do. Quiet professionalism. The Army needs more of it." He dismissed me with a nod. As I turned to leave, he added softly, Captain Parker, don't underestimate the weight of what you proved. Discipline doesn't stop at the gate. Sometimes it begins at home. Outside, the morning felt brighter. The flag above the HQ building snapped in the breeze, sunlight flashing off the pole. I tucked the memo into my pocket like something sacred and walked toward the training yard. The day's PT session was already underway, rows of soldiers running drills shouting cadence. One of the younger MPs, Private Ribera, saw me and called out, Welcome back, ma'am. I raised a hand in acknowledgement. The rhythm of boots on dirt hit me like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd missed. Later that afternoon, I met with the JAG office to finalize the commendation paperwork. Major Erica Dalton, the legal officer who'd guided me through every affidavit and evidence submission, smiled when I walked in. Well, if it isn't our quiet storm, she said. Colonel filled me in. Congratulations! I sat across from her desk, the same spot where I'd once brought in stacks of documents trembling in my hands. It feels strange, I admitted, getting rewarded for surviving something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. That's not what you're being rewarded for, she said. You're being recognized for how you handled it. There's a difference. She leaned back. Do you know how many soldiers spiral when personal life collides with duty? You didn't spiral, you documented, you processed, you adapted. That's leadership under pressure. I let out a slow breath. Still doesn't feel heroic. Good, she said. That's how I know it's real. I smiled faintly. You sound like Colonel Whitaker. We both read your file, she said dryly. Hard not to be impressed. I signed the final line on the commendation packet initialed the DA Form 638 and slid it back across her desk. Anything else I need to do? Just show up to the ceremony and pretend you're not uncomfortable with applause. That's asking a lot, she laughed. You'll survive. That evening, I drove back toward the barracks area, the base alive with the sound of marching calls and distant engines. I parked near the parade field, got out, and walked across the grass where sunset poured in long orange lines. The same field where I'd trained recruits years ago. The same place where I first learned that control wasn't cold, it was compassion measured through discipline. I sat on a low concrete bench, the metal packet still in my hand. The sound of cadence echoed faintly from the far side of the field. One team, one fight. The words hit differently now. For months, my fight had been solitary internal, bound by family and fear. But sitting there, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. The Army, the system that had often felt too rigid, too procedural, had stood with me when no one else did. Justice had come not through rage, but through paperwork, patience, and proof. It wasn't cinematic, it was methodical, and it worked. I thought of Lorraine then not with hate, but with distance. Somewhere out there, she was facing her own consequences. Maybe redemption, maybe ruin. It wasn't my job to know. I thought of Aubrey too, her silence, her tears in court, the way her voice cracked when the judge read the sentence. She would carry her own ghosts. I just hoped one day she'd learn what my father had tried to teach me, that peace doesn't come from being right, it comes from being accountable. The bass loudspeakers crackled suddenly with the sound of retreat. Soldiers paused facing the flag as the music began. I stood instinctively, heels together, hand raised in salute. The notes carried through the warm air, solemn and proud. When it ended, I lowered my hand and exhaled. The sun dipped below the tree line, leaving the field bathed in gold. I looked at the medal form one more time before folding it neatly into my pocket. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a quiet restoration. Proof that even after chaos duty and dignity could coexist. On my way back to HQ, I passed by the training facility where a few new MPs were practicing arrest procedures. One of them, a nervous-looking private, fumbled his restraint technique. I stopped, adjusted his grip, and showed him how to control leverage without aggression. See, I said, you're not here to dominate. You're here to de-escalate. He nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. Good, I said. Remember that. The world doesn't need another hothead with authority. It needs calm under fire. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Ma'am, were you the one from that news story? The officer with the... I cut him off gently. Yes, I said, but remember it for the right reasons. He nodded again, more thoughtfully this time. I walked away, the rhythm of his training shouts fading behind me. That night, back in my quarters, I placed the letter from Colonel Whitaker on my desk beside the ticking wooden clock I'd brought from home. Its steady beat matched my own pulse. For the first time in years, I felt both the soldier and the daughter coexist without conflict. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another duty log, another day of quiet leadership. But tonight, I allowed myself to sit still, let the silence fill the room, and whisper to the air, "I'm home." The envelope sat on my kitchen table for nearly a week before I opened it. No return address, just my name written in an uneven hand, the kind of handwriting that comes from trembling fingers. Inside was a letter from the Cumberland County Rehabilitation Center. The first line was short, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I didn't recognize Aubrey's handwriting at first. It was smaller now, more fragile than the loud, looping scrawl I remembered from when she used to leave sticky notes on the fridge with messages like, "Don't touch my stuff." I read the letter twice before setting it down. She wrote about withdrawal therapy, court-ordered counseling, about how every day she had to write down what she'd done and who it hurt. Her words were stripped bare, no excuses, no self-pity, just an attempt to find language for remorse. Still, it didn't feel complete. There was no real understanding of why she'd done it, only that she was sorry now that consequences had arrived. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into its envelope, and set it aside. I didn't throw it away. I didn't respond either. Not yet. That night, I sat at my desk staring at a blank sheet of paper. The urge to say nothing warred with the urge to say everything. Silence had always been my strongest armor, but some truths deserved to be spoken once not for closure, but for clarity. I began to write. "Aubrey," I started. "I read your letter. I believe you're trying, and that's a start. But trying isn't healing. It's a stage you pass through on the way to something harder." The words came slow, deliberate, like marking coordinates on a map. "When you tied me to that chair, I didn't feel fear first. I felt recognition. The same voice that ordered you to raise that hammer had been whispering for years, telling us both that control equals safety. You learned it from your mother. I learned it from surviving her." I paused, tapping my pen against the desk. The rain outside had started soft tapping the window pane in rhythm. The night you picked up that hammer, something inside me went still. Not because I gave up, but because I realized you were already lost in a kind of rage that reason couldn't touch. You weren't my stepsister anymore. You were a reflection of everything unchecked anger becomes. My chest tightened as I wrote the next line. "You'll never heal if you keep lying, not to others, but to yourself. You didn't do it for your mother. You did it because it made you feel powerful, because in that house pain was the only language that got answered." I let the ink dry before continuing. But here's the thing about power. Once it depends on hurting someone else, it stops being power. It becomes fear with armor on. I leaned back, staring at the words. My hands shook slightly, but not from anger. From release. "I don't hate you, Aubrey," I wrote finally. "I don't forgive you either. Forgiveness implies a debt I don't intend to carry. What I choose instead is distance. You'll rebuild in your way, and I'll stay in mine. That's enough." I ended the letter with something simple. "One day when you're strong enough to stand without apology, you'll realize what I mean. Until then, heal not to be liked, not to be forgiven, but to be free." I signed my name, just Sloan. No rank, no title. Folded the paper, sealed it, addressed it to the rehab facility care of the counselor listed in her letter. I didn't expect a reply, but 2 weeks later one arrived. A smaller envelope, thinner this time. Inside, just one page. "I read your letter every morning it began. You were right. I used to think pain was a currency. Mom taught me that whoever hurts last wins. But when you didn't hit back, when you didn't scream, it broke something in me. Because you proved she was wrong. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to unlearn her rules." At the bottom, she'd drawn a small oak leaf pencil, shaded faint but careful. "I remember the tree in the yard. I used to watch you sit there with Dad's tools. You always looked so steady. I think that's what I envied most." I traced the outline of the leaf with my fingertip. For the first time, her words carried weight. Not manipulation, not guilt, just a beginning. I didn't respond this time. Some exchanges don't need to become dialogues. They just need to exist, acknowledged, and complete. That evening, I took her letter outside. The sky was streaked orange, the same color it had been the day I buried Dad's note beneath the oak tree. I stood in the same spot holding Aubrey's letter between my palms. The air was warm cicadas buzzing low, grounding me in the present. I didn't bury this one. I didn't burn it either. I just read it aloud once, softly to the wind. Then I tore it into small pieces and let them scatter. They fluttered down like quiet snow disappearing into the grass. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't absolution. It was the final thread snapping clean. That night, I dreamed of the house, not the chaos, not the shouting, but the quiet after. In the dream, Aubrey stood under the oak hammer, gone hands empty. She didn't look at me, just up at the branches, sunlight flickering through the leaves. When I woke, I felt lighter. Weeks passed. Fall settled over North Carolina, painting the base in muted golds and browns. Between patrol shifts and outreach classes, I hardly thought about the letters anymore. But one morning, as I checked the community center mailbox, I found a small envelope addressed to the Quiet Line program. Inside was a card with no name, just a line written in neat, careful handwriting. Thank you for teaching women like me that strength isn't loud, it's consistent. No signature, but I knew the script. I smiled. The letter found its place like a seed dropped in the right soil, growing quietly out of sight. Later that day, I visited the oak again this time, with no letters, no ghosts, just a mug of coffee and the hum of wind. The brass bolt I'd placed months ago was still there, tarnished now, half buried. I brushed the dirt away gently. Life had continued on both sides of that story mine in discipline and routine, hers in penance and recovery. And maybe that was enough. I sat under the branches until the light began to fade, listening to the faint creak of the wind through the leaves, the kind of sound that feels like breathing. For the first time since all of it began, I didn't feel watched by the past. I felt accompanied by it. Not haunted, just followed softly by proof that even fractured families can find some echo of peace if they're willing to face truth without cruelty. Back inside, I tucked my copy of Aubrey's first letter into a file labeled Resolved Cases. It wasn't part of any official record, but it belonged there, documentation of another kind. Proof that even the ugliest stories can end with quiet, not noise. Before turning off the lights, I whispered to the room, "We're done now. No anger, no bitterness. Just release." And for the first time, the word family didn't sting. When it crossed my mind, it just felt distant, something I'd survived and outgrown. A full year had passed since that night in the garage, since the sound of sirens had shattered what was left of the past. Seasons had cycled through Fayetteville's summer's heavy heat, giving way to crisp autumn. Then winter's quiet stillness before spring brought its cautious green. I hadn't seen Lorraine or Aubrey since the sentencing. Occasionally, updates filtered through official channels, probation reviews, counselor summaries, brief notations that meant nothing to most but carried weight to me. By June of the following year, one report caught my attention. Lorraine Parker, completion of rehabilitation program, ongoing employment with Fayetteville Women's Shelter. I stared at the line longer than I meant to. It was typed plainly, bureaucratically, but beneath it was something unexpected. She'd stayed sober. She'd found work that actually mattered. I wasn't sure if that made me angry or proud. Maybe both. That weekend curiosity led me toward downtown Fayetteville. The shelter was a modest brick building tucked between a church and an old grocery store, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. The sign out front read, New Horizons Outreach. Cars lined the street. Volunteers unloaded boxes of clothes and canned food through the side door. I parked across the street and sat for a long moment, engine idling, heart oddly steady. Through the open door, I saw her. Lorraine, thinner hair, streaked gray, movement slower but purposeful. She carried a stack of folded blankets, passed them to a young woman with a gentle word, then turned back for more. The sight twisted something inside me. For years, she'd thrived on control power dominance. Now she was serving others quietly, no spotlight, no manipulation. I killed the engine and stepped out standing by the curb. She didn't see me. I didn't call out. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said through silence. Watching her move among the women guiding Listening Steady, I realized she looked human again. Not the woman who had screamed break her jaw, not the stranger who'd signed my name onto forged papers. Just a tired, sober person trying to start over. A car honked behind me, pulling me back to the present. I crossed the street slowly but stopped short of the shelter steps. The smell of detergent and cardboard drifted out. I could hear laughter from somewhere inside, a sound that didn't belong to our shared history. I stayed on the sidewalk, close enough to witness far enough to remain untangled. She turned once toward the door and froze. Even from across the street, I saw her recognize me. Our eyes met 2 seconds of stillness that stretched like an entire lifetime. Then she looked down, shoulders trembling, and pressed a hand to her chest. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just gave the smallest nod and turned away. There was no need to approach, no confrontation, no apology exchange, no cinematic closure. The truth had already done the work, time couldn't. As I walked back to my car, the afternoon light caught the edges of the old oak leaf charm hanging from my rearview mirror, the one Aubrey had sketched on her letter. I ran a thumb over it absently before starting the engine. The drive back toward Fort Liberty was quiet traffic light radio off. The world outside the windshield rolled by in muted colors, but inside, everything felt balanced. Not happy, not sad, just aligned. When I reached the base, I stopped by the community gym for the evening quiet line session. A handful of women waited by the mats, some new faces, some familiar. The program had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Lisa, the coordinator, smiled as I entered. "You're late," she teased. "Got caught in traffic," I said, but she studied me a little longer than usual. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said, and meant it. During the session, as I corrected stances and reminded participants to breathe through tension, my mind drifted briefly to Lorraine. She was probably still at the shelter folding clothes or checking inventory. For the first time, the thought didn't stir pain. It stirred gratitude. Because maybe this her redemption, my peace was the only outcome that ever made sense. Justice had done its part. Life had done the rest. After class ended, one of the women lingered behind. Her name was Tasha, a young military spouse, early 20s, new to the area. She hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am, I heard your story," she said quietly. "The one about your family. I just wanted to say it gave me courage to leave a bad situation." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the same haunted mix of fear and determination I once carried. "Good," I said. "That's what this is for. Learning when to walk away doesn't make you weak. It makes you safe." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Thank you for proving it's possible." After she left, I sat on the edge of the mat for a long time. Lights dimmed, hands resting on my knees. The quiet hum of the air conditioner filled the space, steady and low. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, disguised as ordinary moments like this. Later, as I drove home, twilight settled over the pines lining the base road. The air smelled of rain, and the world seemed to breathe slower. I took the long route home, passing the old highway that led back toward Fayetteville. For a brief second, I considered driving by the house again, the oak tree, the porch light, but stopped myself. Some places don't need revisiting. They live inside you differently once healed. Back at my house, the wooden clock on the mantel ticked softly in the dark. I poured tea, sat by the window, and watched the lights of distant cars flicker across the horizon. I thought about my father, how he'd taught me that integrity wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up when it mattered, even if your voice shook. Lorraine, in her own broken way, had finally shown up too. Maybe that's what repentance looks like, not tears or apologies, but consistent, unseen effort. I wrote her name in the corner of my journal beneath a single line. We both found something new. Hers was repentance. Mine was peace. Months later, as autumn rolled around again, the Fayetteville newspaper ran a small feature on the shelter. There was a photo of the staff, Lorraine among them, standing off to the side, hands clasped, expression calm. The caption read, "Former program participant, now volunteers full-time to help women rebuild their lives." I cut out the article, folded it, and placed it inside my journal. Not for sentiment, for record. Because history matters, not the kind that lives online, but the quiet kind that shapes who we become. On the anniversary of that night, I returned to the oak tree one final time. The grass around its base had grown tall roots sprawling outward like veins. I brought no letters, no mementos, just a small brass plaque engraved with 3 words: proof, patience, peace. I knelt, pressed it into the soil, and whispered, "It's done." The wind rose gently, rustling the branches overhead. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard my father's steady voice, the same calm cadence that had guided me through every hard lesson. "You checked twice, Sloane. That's how you know it's real." I smiled, stood, and turned toward home. Behind me, the tree stood silent but alive, its shadow stretching long in the late afternoon light. A year ago, this ground had been heavy with pain and confusion. Now it felt weightless, like everything that needed to be buried finally had been. The road back to Fort Liberty shimmered in the heat, and as I drove, I realized something simple but profound: closure isn't a door slamming shut. It's the quiet click of understanding that the past has nothing left to teach you. I rolled down the window, let the warm wind hit my face, and laughed softly for the first time in months. Not out of joy, but relief. Out of knowing that survival had turned into living. By the time I reached the base, the evening flag ceremony was ending, soldiers standing tall as the anthem played. I stopped my car, stepped out, and saluted just another soldier in the line, no longer defined by tragedy but by what followed. When the last note faded, I lowered my hand and whispered to the air, "We made it, Dad." The wind answered in rustling pines, the same kind of sound that had filled my childhood. I drove home through the fading light, heart steady, the clocks ticking, echoing faintly in my mind. Peace wasn't loud. It never would be, but it was constant and it was mine. The morning light spilled softly through the open kitchen window, filling the house with a kind of warmth that didn't need words. The air smelled of coffee and wood polish faintly sweet with the scent of blooming azaleas outside. I stood barefoot by the counter mug in hand, watching steam curl upward in slow ribbons. The house, my father's house, had changed since I came back. New paint, new fixtures, a roof that no longer leaked. But the bones were the same. The oak floors still creaked in familiar places. The porch still caught the sunrise at the same angle it always had when Dad sat there reading the paper. Even the old clock on the mantel ticked steadily, its rhythm syncing perfectly with my heartbeat. After everything, the silence here no longer pressed, it breathed. I walked through the living room, fingertips brushing the edges of framed photos on the wall. Some were mine, some were his snapshots of a life spent building rather than breaking. On the table near the window sat my MP badge, its brass edges polished smooth from years of use. I lifted it gently, the metal cool against my skin. Every scratch on its surface told a story. Field calls, training days, long nights at the gate when the world outside was chaos, but inside that perimeter order still meant something. My reflection stared back from the badge, faint but clear. I didn't see the bruised, trembling woman who'd once sat tied to a chair. I saw a soldier who'd stayed within the lines even when the world had shoved her outside them. The difference wasn't pride. It was peace. Outside, the morning stretched wide and golden. Birds darted through the yard, landing on the fence I'd mended myself last month. The oak tree stood steady in the distance, its leaves shifting lazily in the early breeze. Beneath it, the brass plaque I'd placed still glinted faintly when sunlight caught it. Proof, patience, peace. 3 words that had become more than a mantra, they'd become the architecture of my life. I sipped my coffee and thought about how strange justice can be. It rarely arrives when you want it to. It doesn't thunder down from the heavens or come wrapped in applause. It creeps in quietly through small moments, the way a forgery gets uncovered, the way a camera catches truth when memory would have been doubted, the way even a broken woman can find redemption scrubbing floors in a shelter. Justice had come to all of us, but it didn't look the same for each. For Lorraine, it was the slow rebuilding of a conscience. For Aubrey, it was the humility of starting over in therapy. For me, it was stillness, the ability to live without the tremor of fear in my chest. I set the badge down beside the clock and sat on the porch steps, the wood warm beneath me. The morning sun spilled across the lawn, highlighting the faint outline where the grass hadn't yet grown back over the buried letters. I could almost hear Dad's voice again, steady measured, telling me to check twice, decide once. He used to say that justice wasn't about being loud, it was about being right, not righteous, but precise. I hadn't understood it back then. Now, I did. Justice isn't a scene, it's a system one you uphold by staying calm when everything dares you not to be. The world doesn't reward restraint. It notices chaos. But in the quiet aftermath of chaos, it's restraint that keeps you human. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves. Somewhere far off, a car door closed, then laughter drifted down the street. Life had gone on, unbothered, unbroken. That was the most beautiful part. I had thought survival meant holding on tight. Turns out it meant learning how to let go of anger, of guilt, of the fantasy that closure ever looks dramatic. Real closure looks like mornings like this. It looks like coffee steam curling above sunlight. It sounds like the steady tick of a repaired clock. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mr. Harlan, my neighbor, holding a small box in one hand. "Morning, Captain," he said with a grin. "Brought something for that porch of yours." Inside the box was a small wooden wind chime hand-carved with the words, "Stand steady." "Found the scraps in my workshop," he explained. "Thought it fit you." I laughed quietly. "You always know when to show up." He tipped his hat. "So do you. You know I watched you fight this whole battle without lifting a fist. That's the kind of strength this world forgets it needs." I hung the chime on the porch beam. When the breeze caught it, it made a low, calming sound, soft, deliberate, steady. "Thank you," I said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," he replied. "Thank yourself for staying the course." After he left, I sat a while longer listening to the chime mix with birdsong. A year ago, I'd have called it background noise. Now it sounded like evidence that life had repaired itself. The kind of proof you can't document but can still feel. I thought again of Lorraine at the shelter, folding clothes, smiling shyly at women who were where she once was. I'd seen her from across the street a few more times since that day. Never closer, never needing to speak. Distance had become the healthiest form of forgiveness. As for Aubrey, her counselor sent a note through JAG Liaison last month. Reintegration program successful. Continues volunteer work at community center. I didn't respond, but I read it twice. Some wounds heal quietly out of sight. Some don't scar at all, they just fade until they feel like someone else's story. I'd stopped looking for dramatic endings. Life rarely gives them. It gives continuity instead, a slow unfolding of days where the past becomes just another reference point, not a wound to reopen. I finished my coffee, and walked down the porch steps into the sunlight. The grass was cool under my feet. I crouched by the base of the oak, brushing away a few fallen leaves from the plaque. My reflection shimmered faintly in its brass surface. Proof. Patience. Peace. Each word had earned its place. Proof, the body cam footage, the paperwork, the documentation that kept truth alive when memory alone could have been twisted. Patience, the long months of waiting through investigations, hearings, statements, knowing that justice doesn't sprint, it marches. Peace, the stillness that followed when I finally understood that revenge doesn't complete the story. Only truth does. I stayed there a long moment, hand resting on the ground. The earth was firm alive. No ghosts left to speak, no shadows left to confront. Just presence. Inside my phone buzzed a calendar reminder for the next Quiet Line seminar. This one wasn't at the gym. It was on base, part of a wider Army initiative to integrate domestic resilience training into leadership development. The idea had come from Colonel Whitaker himself. "Your story did more for discipline briefings than any slide deck we've ever made," he'd said with a grin. "Now go teach them what restraint really looks like." I smiled, remembering it. The Army has a way of turning pain into curriculum, and for once that felt right. I got dressed, clipped the MP badge onto my belt, and caught my reflection in the mirror before heading out. The woman looking back was older, steadier. No trace of chaos, just resolve. On the drive to the base, sunlight filtered through the pines, painting shifting shadows across the road. The air smelled like cut grass and diesel fuel, ordinary grounding. When I reached the training center, soldiers were already gathering in the classroom. I took a seat at the front next to the projector. The session topic glowed on the screen, professional composure under domestic stressors. I started with what I always did, silence, letting the room settle before speaking. "You'll hear a lot about courage in this uniform," I said finally. "About battlefield's honor sacrifice. But no one teaches you the courage it takes to stay calm when the fight happens at your own dinner table. The room went still. We train to de-escalate strangers, I continued. But sometimes the hardest part is de-escalating the people you love. That's why proof matters. That's why patience matters. Because without them, even the right person can look guilty in the wrong light. One soldier in the back raised his hand. Ma'am, what do you do when the people closest to you never change? I looked at him, the weight of his question echoing my own past. You stop waiting for them to, I said. You build a life that doesn't need their apology. When the session ended, a few lingered to thank me. One young sergeant said quietly, Ma'am, my sister went through something similar. I never knew how to help her. Now I do. I nodded. That's how justice keeps moving, one person choosing calm when it would be easier to choose chaos. By late afternoon, I was back home. The sky burned amber as the sun dipped low. The wind chime on the porch moved lazily, its sound blending with the hum of the crickets. Inside, I placed my badge back on the mantel next to the clock. The hands ticked smoothly now, no more stalling at 9:17. I leaned against the doorway, looking out at the oak tree glowing in the last light of day. My father's voice came back to me once more, not as memory, but as understanding. You don't need to win the fight, Sloane. You just need to stand through it. I smiled, letting the thought settle deep. The world outside my window was ordinary again. Children riding bikes, neighbors grilling dinner dogs, barking in distant yards. Ordinary never looked so beautiful. I took one last sip of coffee, gone cold, set the mug down, and whispered into the fading light. Justice doesn't need revenge. It needs proof, patience, and peace. The words hung in the air like a benediction, quiet and final. Then I closed the door behind me, letting the evening hum carry on as it always had, steady, simple, true. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Not just for listening, but for feeling it, for walking beside Captain Sloane Parker through every bruise that didn't show, every silent victory that didn't need noise, and every inch of quiet justice earned through proof, patience, and peace. Because this isn't just a story about one woman in uniform. It's about every person who's ever been told to stay quiet, to let it go, to keep the peace when that peace was a lie. It's about anyone who's ever been pushed, doubted, manipulated, and still found the courage to stand, not in rage, but in truth. If that's you, take a breath. You're not alone. The stories we tell here aren't about revenge for the sake of spectacle. They're about what happens when dignity fights back with discipline. When someone chooses evidence over noise, documentation over destruction, and calm over chaos. When they refuse to let toxic people dictate the definition of strength. That's what Sloane did. And maybe that's what you've done too, quietly, without applause, without anyone noticing how hard it was. Maybe your version of a garage isn't a literal one. Maybe it's a living room where you learned to measure every word before speaking because peace always felt conditional. Maybe it's a workplace where someone tried to undermine you and you stayed professional even when your hands shook. Maybe it's a relationship that drained you until you learned that leaving wasn't weakness, it was proof that you still valued yourself. That's what we explore here, the turning points. The moment humiliation becomes self-respect. The moment discipline stops feeling like submission and starts feeling like power. When we write these stories, they aren't fiction to many of you. They're reflections. And that's why your voice matters here, because every story shared in the comments helps someone else recognize they're not isolated. They're part of something bigger. So I want to ask you, not as a narrator, not as a content creator, but as a person, where are you watching from? Drop your city and local time below. Tell me what the world looks like outside your window right now. Tell me if you're sitting in silence like Sloane, or if you're somewhere loud and alive. And more importantly, tell me this. What would you have done? Would you have stayed calm in that garage, knowing the camera in your pocket could save your life? Or would you have fought back right then and there? Would you have forgiven from afar, like Sloane did, or gone to that shelter and confronted the ghosts head-on? Would you have buried the letter under the oak tree, or kept it as a reminder of what you survived? There's no wrong answer. There's just your truth. And sometimes writing it down or speaking it here is how healing starts. Because these stories aren't about perfect endings. They're about process. They're about the soldier who learns to disarm not just her enemies, but her own anger. The neighbor who brings kindness instead of gossip. The stepmother who, after destroying everything she touched, finally picks up a blanket in a shelter and folds it right. The daughter who finally sleeps without checking the locks twice. This is quiet justice. It's not cinematic, but it's real. And if you've lived long enough, if you're part of our community of seasoned hearts, people who've seen betrayal up close and learned the price of peace, then you know what I mean. You know that forgiveness isn't a handshake. It's the ability to walk away without bitterness. You know that justice isn't always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes it's just the freedom to drink your coffee in the morning without fear. You know that peace doesn't roar. It hums softly like a repaired clock on a mantle that finally keeps time again. So tell me, does this story remind you of someone? A sibling who betrayed your trust, a parent who played favorites until you had to build your own worth from scratch, a partner who mistook your silence for weakness. Drop your thoughts below. You never know who might read your comment at 2 a.m., scrolling through their phone and finally feel less alone because of what you shared. And if you're one of those people right now, someone who's still in the middle of your own version of Sloane's story, I want you to remember this. You don't have to match cruelty with cruelty. You don't have to prove your worth by fighting dirty. You just have to prove it exists. That's what proof, patience, and peace means. Proof that the truth will outlast the lies. Patience that time will do what anger never could. Peace that walking away doesn't mean you lost. It means you outgrew the war. When you comment where you're watching from, don't just type a city. Add a little bit of your story. Tell us how you got here. Tell us if you've ever stood up to someone who thought they could rewrite your truth. Tell us if you've ever learned to stay calm when every nerve in your body screamed to react. Our community reads every story, every reflection, because each one adds another piece to what we're building, a space where justice doesn't need a courtroom, where healing isn't weakness, and where strength isn't loud. Maybe you're watching from a quiet kitchen in Ohio, coffee in hand. Maybe from a nursing home in Florida, remembering the family you once tried to hold together. Maybe from a military base in Texas, halfway through your shift, recognizing the discipline in Sloane's restraint. Maybe from a small apartment in California, the clock ticking just like hers. Wherever you are, your experience matters here. Your perspective adds something no algorithm can replicate: humanity. That's what this channel is about. Not spectacle, not exploitation, but connection through survival, through truth, through the strength it takes to endure without becoming what hurt you. So, let's talk. What does justice look like for you? Is it an apology you never got? A house you finally made into a home again? A job where you're respected instead of silenced? What did your garage moment look like? That point when someone crossed a line and you realized you didn't have to shrink anymore. And if you're still waiting for that moment, hold on. Because stories like this exist to remind you that control doesn't belong to those who hurt you. It belongs to the ones who survive, to the ones who keep showing up, to the ones who record the truth. File the report, take the photo, write the letter, and refuse to be erased. To the ones who let the oak tree stand and the clock tick and the proof speak louder than rage ever could. That's justice. Not the kind you watch in movies, but the kind you build one steady day at a time. If you felt something reading this, if a line stuck with you or a moment mirrored your own, let us know below. Say where you're from. Say what time it is. Say whether the sun's rising or setting where you are. Because somewhere else in the world, someone's watching this same story at the exact same moment, wondering if they're the only one who understands. And when they see your comment, they'll know they're not. They'll know that justice doesn't always come from shouting the loudest. Sometimes it comes from a quiet nod, a calm breath, a slow rebuild. Sometimes it comes from you. So, where are you watching from? Drop your city and local time and tell me, what would you have done? Would you have recorded the truth? Would you have stayed calm under threat? Would you have chosen peace when revenge felt easier? Your answers are what keep these stories alive. Your perspective is what reminds the world that dignity still matters even when the world forgets it does. Because at the end of every story like this one, that's what we're left with: not the chaos, not the courtroom, not the villains, just the survivors, just the proof, just the quiet, just the peace. And maybe after everything you've endured, that's exactly what justice sounds like.